Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation by Rifujin Namaganoth, cast by our Tale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Trust is a pretty fragile thing. You can break it with words, actions, or even money. A strong will is the most trustworthy of traits. Author Rudeus, Great Jeer. Chapter 1, The Road to Asura. Neutral, the journey from Renoa to the kingdom of Asura usually took several months. But fortunately, we had access to the teleportation circles. Our first stop was Perugia's floating fortress, where we could teleport ourselves and our carriage to a spot just north of the Asuran border. From there, we'd be traveling more conventionally down to our destination.
Oh, wow. This is incredible, Rudeus. That town's just a tiny speck from up here.
Eris hopped from her horse in excitement within moments of our arrival at the fortress. With her mouth wide open, she stared over the edge at the ground below, then snapped her gaze to look up at Perugia's imposing castle. She looked more like a kid at an amusement park than a 20-year-old woman. It was definitely cute, but I think most of us also felt a little secondhand embarrassment. Still, her obvious excitement seemed to please Perugia's servant Silverel, who'd been waiting for us in front of the teleportation circle.
How do you like the view from our floating fortress Chaos Breaker, miss?
It's amazing. I've never seen anything like this before.
Neutral Silveril nodded, looking very satisfied indeed. I guess he had a soft spot for the little ray of sunshine types. Understandable.
It's kind of you to say so. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Silvaril of the Void, first among the servants of Lord Perugius. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
I'm Eris Greyrat.
By this point, Eris was shooting eager glances at the castle. Picking up on her enthusiasm, Silveril led the way forward, taking her on a kind of guided tour. The rest of us followed behind, watching them while smiling. Eventually, our party arrived at the audience hall.
Neutral? Ah, there you are.
Just like the last time, we found Perugius leaning in his tall chair with a haughty expression and his loyal spirits at his side. We were mainly stopping by today to pay our respects. Ariel took a graceful step forward, ready to deliver some formal spiel. But before she could get a word out, Eris broke from the group and strode right up to the master of the castle. Fearful, I had a vision of Eris leaping forward to take a swing at him, and a chill ran down my spine. The man was more indulgent than you'd expect, but that didn't mean he would tolerate that kind of disrespect. As I stepped forward to intervene, however, Eris abruptly dropped to one knee.
It's an honor to meet you, sir. I'm Eris Greyrat, who recently became Rudeus's wife. Thank you for your hospitality.
I stopped in my tracks and blinked in surprise.
Neutral, I am Perugius Dola, known as the Armored Dragon King. I know of you, Eris Greyrat. You're the so-called Berserker Sword King who challenged Orsted himself, yes?
It's nothing worth boasting of, sir, but I am.
Eris was speaking in an unusually humble tone, but the words were coming out a little flat and forced. I was beginning to suspect she'd actually memorized all of these lines beforehand.
Well, Eris Greyrat, I find your modesty most endearing. Allow me to apologize for that unfortunate incident 8 years ago, when my subordinate assaulted you.
Neutral, Eris looked up with a dubious expression. Clearly, the girl didn't even remember what he was talking about.
It's all water under the bridge.
Is it? My thanks, then. You're most understanding.
Chuckling softly, Perugius waved his hand in a lordly gesture of welcome. Eris rose to her feet and walked back to us with a satisfied smirk. I could practically hear her saying, "See? I can handle this stuff just fine when I put my mind to it." The girl really had rehearsed this whole thing. I was fully convinced of that now. In any case, it seemed she'd left a good first impression on Perugius. He hadn't been nearly so friendly to me the first time we met. I guess Eris's openness was just naturally endearing. Well, whatever. At least it didn't turn into a brawl.
Please follow me, everyone.
Neutral little later, after Ariel had offered her own greeting, we followed Sylvarl back out of the hall. The teleportation circle we'd be using was located a little farther behind the one we'd come through. We found it in the rear of a large, empty hall, glowing faintly in the gloom. Sylvarl took the time to give us a lecture on the history of the hall itself, but I'll just omit all that. The most important thing was that this particular teleportation circle would take us to a forest close to the Asuran border. Perugius had a number of other circles in his fortress, but this was the one that would bring us closest to our destination. Unfortunately, it wasn't like functional circles remained in every city on the map. All of those in the floating fortress itself were kept active by Perugius's mana, but in order to actually use them, the circle on the other end also had to be actively powered. Under normal circumstances, you'd have to ensure both circles were activated simultaneously by people on either side, which sounded incredibly inconvenient. But there was a workaround of sorts, which involved a kind of special magical implement, supposedly invented by the same genius mage who created the teleportation circles themselves. These implements were capable of automatically absorbing mana from their surroundings to keep the circles perpetually active. However, they only worked in certain areas where the air was thick with mana. That naturally limited the locations where the teleportation circles could be placed. This was probably the reason why the circles I'd used on my way to Begarid, for example, had been in such inconvenient spots, deep in the forest or way off in the desert. Generations of researchers did eventually find a way around this issue. Circles in other places could be continually powered by magical crystals, as long as they were regularly replaced. It was a manually powered alternative to the older automatic design. The kingdom of Asura was located in a region with very low mana density, so nearly all of its teleportation circles had been of this newer type. They were powered when strictly necessary, and left inactive otherwise. Only a handful of people even knew where the magic crystals needed to be placed in order to activate them. It was a moot point now, though. All the manual and automatic teleportation circles in the entire country had recently been destroyed by some unknown party. The only one who knew where to find them all was the man guy. And the only person with the power to have them all destroyed was the High Minister Darius, who could call on private forces dotted all across the kingdom. Those were our best guesses as to the culprits at the moment, at least. Unless you had a suitable place, suitable tools, and extensive knowledge of magic circles, you had no hope of making a teleportation circle yourself. In other words, we couldn't have made one for ourselves inside Asura. We were going to have to take a somewhat longer road to our destination. Anyway, we'd managed to work out our travel plans, but I had to wonder how Perugius was planning to show up later on. When I brought this up at our audience, he'd brushed off the question, telling me that I didn't need to worry myself about it. Ariel seemed to be aware of the details at least. Maybe he was planning some sort of dramatic surprise appearance. Neutral, we stepped into the teleportation circle and soon found ourselves standing in a ruin. Its layout and construction were very similar to that of the building in the desert I'd teleported into on the Begarid continent. From what Orsted told me, there had once been many structures of this sort all around the world, and many of the races had moved freely between the continents. After their misuse for military purposes, however, their use and construction had been forbidden. Some of the dragonfolk had strongly disagreed with this decision. They secretly protected a number of the circles they regularly used with subtle magical barriers, which was the only reason there were still a decent handful of the things lying around. Some people just don't give a damn about the common good, I guess. Not that I was complaining or anything. Thanks to their selfishness, we could move around the world a bit more easily. Neutral, we made our way out of the ruin and found ourselves standing in a thick, vibrant forest. Based on the map we'd studied beforehand, we were just a bit northwest of the narrow valley known as the Red Worm's upper jaw. Unfortunately, we ran into a bit of a problem right off the bat. We'd gotten our carriage onto the teleportation circle just fine, but now we couldn't get the thing out of the ruin. You'd think somebody would have realized that was going to be an issue, right? Before I could feel too disgusted with myself, though, Ariel's two attendants began steadily taking the carriage apart. Bit by bit, they broke it down into pieces and carried them out the door. Neutral, the thing had struck me as unusually small, but it was apparently a model that could be disassembled. We strapped the parts of the carriage to our horses and made our way slowly to the main road. where the thing was quickly reassembled. The sun was setting by this point, though, so we decided to set up camp nearby and spend the night there. Since we were surrounded by a lush forest, it was easy enough to procure both food and kindling. We hunted a few beast-like monsters for their meat, picked some wild plants for seasoning, and killed a few trants for their wood. Honestly, it felt like you couldn't go 10 feet in this world without stumbling over a trant of some kind. There was even one living in my front yard these days. They were probably going to take over the planet sooner or later. Normally, an improvised camp like this would have meant settling on the bare ground, or maybe a log. But to my surprise, one of Ariel's attendants rolled out some nice thick carpets for us to sit on. I suppose royalty always traveled in style, regardless of the circumstances. Sylphy and Ariel's attendants took care of all the cooking that night. When I offered to help, they gently shooed me away. Given Sylphy's superior skills, I probably would have been more of a nuisance than anything else. I told them to let me know if they needed any additional plates or cutlery. It was easy enough for me to make more of those. I found myself with nothing to do while the food was being prepared. I briefly thought about keeping watch, but Ghislaine and Eris were already standing guard, so I wasn't going to be too useful there either. I had no specific role to play on this trip. That was actually a first for me. I'd traveled solo for years, and as a temporary member of many parties, but I'd never been total deadweight before. Back in my adventuring days, my large supply of mana meant that I was assigned all sorts of odd jobs. But now that I found myself in a well-supplied group with 2 attendants who could use magic, I suddenly had nothing at all to do but sit around. It felt a little awkward. Then again, I wasn't here to wait on Princess Ariel hand and foot. My task was to identify the man-god's disciples and deal with them, one way or another. Currently, I had some suspicions about Ariel's knight Luke, as well as the Asuran minister Darius. That was 2 out of 3. It seemed likely that the third and final disciple was either the North Emperor or the Water God, who joined the cause of our enemies. Orsted had given me instructions on how to face them both, but before I actually met them on the battlefield, I needed to take some time to carefully consider how those fights would play out in practice. I glanced over at Luke with these thoughts running through my mind. He was standing at attention beside Ariel, clad in his impressively shiny armor. For all appearances, he was ready and eager to defend her from any unexpected danger. There was a very good chance Luke was currently a disciple of the man-god. Still, I believed he would put his life on the line to defend the princess. It wasn't like being the man-god's disciple made you his loyal puppet or anything. I knew from experience how it worked. The slippery little jerk would give you all sorts of advice that seemed helpful, only to betray you at the very last moment. In other words, the man-god's disciples were usually his victims. Even good, honest people could be misled by his lies. It wasn't Luke's fault he had an evil god manipulating him. That made me very hesitant to even consider killing him. Apart from everything else, he was a key member of Ariel's faction who'd provided her with all sorts of support over the years. He'd still have a crucial role to play, even after she became queen. Of course, the kingdom of Asura wouldn't be helping Orsted in his quest for another 100 years. Luke would be dead by then either way, so maybe his fate wasn't that significant. Still, it had to be important for Ariel to be an effective queen, right? Having Luke around might help her maneuver things in the right direction. Well, maybe. Or maybe this was one of those fixed turning points in history. In other words, if Ariel became queen, things would work out somehow. And if the first prince took the throne instead, we were headed for a bad end no matter what. The idea still seemed really odd to me. Reality had to be more complicated than a scripted video game, right? At the end of the day, I had to rely on Orsted's knowledge about this stuff. And it was hard to say if he would ever give me a complete explanation of things. He'd never gone into much detail about the crucial events that would occur a century from now. I'd pressed him once about the man-god's claim that his actions would destroy the world, and he had simply said, "That is a possibility to be certain." Honestly, killing the man-god seemed to be the only thing that mattered to Orsted. I didn't get the sense he cared about what came after that. And at the moment, I couldn't afford to worry about what might happen 100 years down the road. I had my hands full keeping my family safe in the present. Was that irresponsible? Short-sighted? Yeah, probably. Couldn't bring myself to care, though. The people living in the future could deal with their own problems. Still, I had to wonder why my descendants would join Orsted knowing that his victory might destroy the world. Maybe they weren't going to know. The idea made me feel kinda bad for them. It couldn't hurt to leave them a message explaining it was a possibility, right? Probably?
Rudy, dinner's ready. Kalena, Iris, come get some food.
Neutral, my thoughts had wandered quite a bit by the time those words snapped me back to reality. I'd have to write a nice long diary entry after we made it back from Asura. I had a feeling some of this stuff might slip my mind otherwise. Neutral, Ariel retired to her tent at nightfall. The rest of us would be camping outside, keeping watch over the area on alternating shifts. There were 7 of us in the party, apart from the princess. 2 of us were enough to keep an eye on things, but we'd have one shift with 3 people in it. We decided that one person on this larger shift would leave the camp and patrol the nearby woods, looking for anything unusual. This would have to be someone capable of defeating monsters on their own, which meant me, Sylphy, Eris, or Ghislaine. That first night, this role fell to me. Okay, I'm going to go take a look around. Stepped away from the light of our fire and made my way into the depths of the forest. Soon, I was surrounded by inky blackness with nothing but a torch to light my way. I could sense there were no enemies in the immediate area, but it was still slightly unsettling. After 5 minutes of steady walking, I'd traveled a good distance from our camp. That was when someone suddenly stepped forward out of the darkness. A moment before, there'd been nothing in front of me, and now I was staring up at a tall, silver-haired man with sharp golden eyes and a terribly intense face. Yelping reflexively, I fumbled with my torch, very nearly dropping it. Pardon me. It's good to see you, Sir Orsted. I seated myself on a nearby tree root, trying to slow my racing heart. Orsted settled down on another, facing me at a distance of several feet. The man had trailed our footsteps. I'd known that was the plan all along, of course. Perugius was probably aware of this as well, since Orsted had likely used the same teleportation circle as us. I was expected to make periodic reports to Orsted during our journey. The others might get suspicious if I disappeared on my own too frequently, so the plan was to meet up once every several days, whenever it was my turn to scout the area.
Neutral, how are things, Sylph?
Neutral Luke hasn't done anything suspicious, and the journey's going smoothly at this point. These were the 2 things he'd tasked me to monitor, but it was only the first day, so there wasn't much to say. Orsted clearly hadn't expected anything else either.
And neutral, that makes sense. I wouldn't expect anything to happen too quickly.
Shears.
However, be on your guard when you pass through the upper jaw.
Yeah, absolutely. The Red Worm's upper jaw was a narrow choke point that connected the kingdom of Asura and the northern territories through the tall mountain range that separated them. It was a single path, just wide enough for 2 large carriages to pass each other by. Orsted had very nearly killed me in a similar pass down south, which was called the Red Worm's lower jaw. Once we made our way down the valley, we'd arrive at a large, dense forest known as the Red Worm's Whiskers. This place was well known to the people of Asura, although they often just referred to it as part of the upper jaw. This forest was technically in Asuran territory, but the physical border wall was located just to its south. There the kingdom had built a great fortress, which completely sealed off the pass. It was manned by hundreds of soldiers at any given time. That fortress had several purposes. Primarily, it prevented the forest monsters from wandering south into Asuran territory, and discouraged any attempts at invasion from the north. There was one other crucial reason for its placement, though. That forest just to the north was a very convenient place to dispose of inconvenient people. The Red Worm's Whiskers were essentially outside Asuran territory, and the density of the trees made witnesses less likely. The forest was crawling with monsters and border-straddling bandit gangs, too. It was the ideal place to make someone disappear. Assuming Darius was really getting advice from the man-god, there was an excellent chance we'd encounter some kind of an ambush there. Dispatching his forces further north would be a risky violation of another country's territory, and once we were south of the fortress, any attempt on the princess's life would likely be witnessed, and word of mouth would spread the story. The forest was the single least risky place for him to murder Ariel. That was where he'd strike for the first time. Or so Orsted had concluded. Anyway. No troll, I'll proceed as planned then.
Neutral, yes.
If there was an attack, I could use it as evidence to discourage any further travel on the main roads. Once I convinced them that heading straight for the capital would be too risky, our search for alternative routes should lead us straight to hiring Triss and her group of bandits. If there wasn't an attack, Orsted was planning to take action himself, which meant a false flag operation, basically. Orsted had brought a number of summoning scrolls and magic crystals to activate them with. The monsters they would summon weren't native to this area, so I could convincingly argue someone had sent them after us. Either way, things should work out according to our plans.
If there is an attack, the North Emperor Aber Corbett will likely be there. Be very cautious when you face him.
Yeah, we went over that already, right?
Neutral, we did, yes?
The Asurans had apparently hired the services of both the North Emperor and the Water God, but the odds were good they would send the former to kill us. According to Orsted, Abba's style was well suited to this kind of dirty work. The man was a perfect personification of the North God style, as bizarre and unpredictable as they come. Everything about him was odd, from his clothing to his hairstyle to his techniques. They called him the Peacock Blade, and he was a master of surprise attacks.
I can't help but worry.
Neutral. About what?
You, of course?
Surprised. I just blinked at that.
There's a battle close at hand, but you seem...
Unconcerned? Well, maybe I wasn't as tense as you might expect under the circumstances, but I felt like we were prepared for this. Orsted had told me how to fight Aber. There was no guarantee he'd show up, but if he did, I'd simulated our battle in my mind many times over the last few days. I knew the man was a dangerous opponent. I didn't see how getting nervous was going to help matters. Keeping my cool was important if I wanted to survive. There was no guarantee I'd be victorious, but it was probably better for me to stay relaxed, right? Probably.
Neutral, take these with you, just in case.
Neutral. Orsted retrieved a few pieces of paper from within his coat. They were scrolls covered in complex magic circles.
Neutral, this is king-tier healing magic. You're only advanced in that school, yes? Use these if the need arises.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't tell you what king-tier healing spells did off the top of my head. I felt like they were strong enough to regenerate a lost limb if necessary. My evasive and defensive abilities were somewhat limited, and my opponent's offensive skills were top-notch. It probably was a good idea for me to have something like these up my sleeve. I didn't even know there were magic circles for healing magic this advanced.
Neutral, almost all known spells can be replicated through the use of...
Almost? So there's some exceptions to the rule?
Neutral, yes. Certain unique spells with unusual means of activation, primarily.
Like what?
Neutral, the howl casting of the beast folk, the gravity magic of the king dragons. Spells of that nature cannot be used without an understanding of the principles involved.
Howl casting had to be what I'd always called vocal magic. I'd managed to pick up a bit of that myself, enough to startle people with my voice at least. It was hard to say how much of that effect came from the magic itself, though. Having someone shout at you is kind of startling in general.
Neutral, you said your future self could use gravity magic, yes? That must have taken considerable time and effort. You must study the forms, understand them thoroughly, and learn how to put them into practice.
People, say you're capable of using basically every kind of magic. Can you cast gravity spells yourself?
Neutral, I can. They're not especially useful for my purposes, however.
That's Orsted for you. Really, why did I even bother asking? Did you learn all of your spells and techniques one by one? You weren't born knowing all of this, were you?
Neutral, no. I had to learn everything I know over time.
At the moment, I could only vaguely imagine the principles behind gravity magic. I didn't even know what the magic entailed, exactly. but if I spent long enough puzzling it over, maybe I'd eventually hit on some clever way to make an object weightless or something. I didn't have time to pursue something I might never figure out, though. For the foreseeable future, I needed to focus on the task at hand. This sort of stuff could wait until I had a chance to catch my breath. Okay, anything else I need to ask about? Oh, maybe Luke. Just one last thing, Sir Austin. If Luke does turn out to be a disciple of the man god, you're letting me decide whether to spare his life, correct?
Neutral, yes.
Let's say I spare him and Ariel manages to become queen. What would happen to him in that scenario, you think?
Neutral, nothing in particular. Once we make it that far, it will mean his release from the man god's curse.
The man god can only have 3 disciples at once, right? Can we really let one go and just hope he stops controlling them?
There's no need to worry about that. The man god can only influence a disciple until his foresight of their future becomes clear.
Wait, what? Couldn't you have mentioned this a little earlier, boss? This seems kind of important. Doesn't that mean he could suddenly swap out a disciple in the middle of a fight or something?
Neutral. In this case, the outcome will hinge on Ariel's attempt to defeat Darius and Grable. The man god cannot see the player's future past this as of yet.
So that means they won't be changing disciples on us until the outcome is decided?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. This would have been good to know earlier. Well, at least he told me now, I guess. No point filing a complaint about it. So, until this power struggle was completely resolved, the man god's disciples weren't going to change. And once it was all over, they'd naturally be freed from his control, although it was possible he might reach out to them again later on to use them in some other scheme. On another note, it sounded like no matter what, the man god couldn't take on a new disciple until we reached the turning point, which meant that killing one of them would reduce the number of pawns at his disposal for now. It was definitely the smarter choice to take them out, if at all possible. Okay, I should head back now. They might get suspicious if I'm gone too long. Neutral, I rose to my feet, and the first of our regular meetings was adjourned. I hurried back to the campfire and reported that I hadn't seen anything unusual. The next shift soon took our places, and I slipped under my blanket. The first day of our journey had passed uneventfully enough. Neutral Chapter 2, The Red Worm's Upper Jaw. The upper jaw was a single road that took us through a narrow valley. The path wasn't as straight as the Holy Sword Highway, but it was just as simple. There were no side roads or forks to worry about. This place was basically a border zone, unclaimed by any nation. It was also a choke point for trade. After a few hours of travel, we met a large caravan heading in the opposite direction. At a glance, I saw about a dozen covered wagons and more than 50 horses laden with goods. They probably belonged to Asuran merchants on their way to the Magic Nations. There were also tougher-looking sorts trudging along on foot at regular intervals. Adventurers who'd been hired as guards, judging from the way they glared at us. The sight brought back some memories. I joined a caravan much like this one on my way up to the Northern Territories. It had been a smaller one, though, with younger guards and merchants. Back then, I was all alone in the world, and feeling very sorry for myself. In the immediate aftermath of Eris's disappearance, I was convinced that my future would be bleak and lonely. I lost the ability to put my trust in anyone or anything. The only things that kept me sane were my routines, training myself, and mumbling prayers to my holy idol. I'd come a long way since then. Happy thanks to Sylphy, I'd regained my confidence. I was a father now, maybe not the best one in the world, but still. I'd cleared up that misunderstanding with Eris and married her as well. Somehow, I'd even wound up married to my beloved teacher, Roxy, who'd be having my second child soon. With 3 loving wives, I wasn't spending many nights sad and lonely anymore. What would young Rudeus say if he could see me now? I had purpose in my life, and all the emotional support I needed.
Are you gonna say something or what?
Neutral Eris' voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I guess we'd ended up riding side by side at some point. I wasn't much of a horseman, so I was riding pillion with Sylphy. Hey, Eris,
Yeah?
can I grope you for a minute?
What? No! Don't be ridiculous!
Well, I could ask for emotional support at least. Anyway, the sight of me flirting with my wives probably wouldn't cheer young Rudeus any. He'd probably just smile weakly and say congratulations, then slink away as quickly as possible. That was just the way I was back then. I knew other people were capable of being happy, but I'd convinced myself that it was never going to happen for me. The least painful option was to keep my distance.
Rudy? Why did you ask Eris for permission but not me?
As I was thinking about the past, my hands had apparently worked their way up to Sylphy's chest. No wonder I'd been feeling something soft against my palms. Surprised. Whoops. Sorry, sweetie. Didn't even know I was doing it, I swear.
There aren't any monsters around here, so it's not that big a deal. But keep your hands to yourself once we hit the forest, okay?
You're an angel. I'm sorry, really.
You do realize you're still groping me, right?
Smiling slightly, Sylphy scratched behind her ears in a gesture of mild embarrassment. To be honest, I'd been doing this a lot ever since we got married. At every available opportunity, more or less. Sylphy had sort of gotten used to it by now, and I definitely wasn't getting tired of it.
You can ride behind me tomorrow, Rudeus.
Before I could respond, she spurred her horse to the front of our party, blushing furiously. Happy-ah, did I make her jealous? Anyway, we were coming up on the end of the valley and the entrance to the forest. I had to assume there was an ambush waiting for us in that place. It was time to focus on the job at hand. At the very end of the Red Wim's upper jaw, we had an almost panoramic view of the forest that stretched out ahead of us. The entrance to the valley was elevated enough that we could see all the way to the fortress walls on the other side. Still, the trees grew tall and dense here, so it was impossible to trace the road we'd be taking past the point where it twisted into the woods. There was no chance we'd spot anything that might be lurking deep inside waiting for us, and it was clear enough nothing that happened in there would be visible from the outside. The fortress walls were tall enough that the soldiers on that side could easily monitor the valley entrance where we stood. In other words, they could keep track of who entered the forest and who left it, but we couldn't see the fortress gate over the tree line from our vantage point. Anyone coming from the Asuran side had a geographical advantage. This really was the perfect place for them to attack us.
Well, I guess we're finally back.
Sylphy murmured quietly, bringing her horse to a halt at the entrance to the forest. Luke had stopped as well along with the carriage. Eris and Ghislaine drew to a halt a moment later. Ariel's two attendants disembarked from the driver's seat of the carriage. Without a word, Sylphy and Luke dismounted. A moment later, the princess herself emerged from inside the carriage, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. The five of them walked together toward a stone sitting at the side of the road. It was a perfectly ordinary-looking rock for the most part, but someone had carved an X deep into its surface. Ariel stepped in front of the group, bent down and placed the flowers on top of the stone, then brought her hands together in the Mila style of prayer. I knew the princess wasn't particularly religious. This was the first time I'd ever seen her pray, in fact. Luke and Sylphy weren't too pious either, though I wasn't sure about attendance, but they all knew the people buried under that stone. It was the final resting place of all the knights and mages and attendants who'd fallen fighting for Ariel in this forest. They'd been attacked numerous times on their journey to the north, but many had died in an ambush here, and some of those people had probably been believers.
There's a much greater risk of ambush here. Let's camp just outside the forest for today, and then push through it in a single day tomorrow.
With that, Sylphy and the others walked back to their horses, looking much more serious than before. That night, we went over our battle formation one more time. We also reviewed our techniques and skills and discussed how we should react to various combat situations. Eris and Ghislaine would be our front line. Sylphy, quick-witted and versatile, would be supporting them in the midfield. And I would hang back trying to position myself so I could monitor the entire battlefield with my eye of foresight. Luke and the two attendants would be focused solely on Ariel's personal safety. Their gear was solid, but in all honesty, we didn't want to integrate them into our battle plans. They just get in the way on the front lines with Ghislaine and Eris. Anyway, we wanted someone close to Ariel at all times in case of any surprise attacks. Clean the attendant would be acting as a body double for the princess with the help of a magical implement that could change her hair color and facial features. This was the reason why both attendants had hair of similar length to Ariel's. They were a little different in build and height, but there wasn't much we could do about that. Clean was closer to Ariel in height, so the role had fallen to her first. If she were killed, Elamoy would take on the job in her place. In a sense, Ariel was starting out with 2 bonus lives. Our goal was to get through this without losing any of them. I didn't know Clean or Elamoy very well, but it would still feel terrible if we failed to protect them. Tomorrow, we'd proceed on the assumption we were walking straight into a trap.
We saved a lot of time by teleporting here. Won't the assassins be dispatched much later?
Minister Darius is a very thorough man. He likely took action the moment he learned of my father's declining health.
The real question was what kind of action he'd taken. None of us could say for sure. We did know that he'd retained the services of 2 powerful swordsmen, and it seemed reasonable to expect that the North Emperor Aber Corbett would be the one to attack us here. I had considered telling everyone about Aber's style and how to counter it, but if he and Luke were both disciples of the man-god, that might come back to bite me. It seemed safer to keep my silence. The last thing I needed was to have Ober ready and waiting for my strategy. For this first battle, at least, I needed to handle him by myself. It would require constant vigilance to protect everyone in the party. Well, Ghislaine could probably take care of herself no matter what. But still, I had to be on top of my game tomorrow. The next morning, we set off bright and early in the formation we'd agreed on. Ghislaine and Eris took the lead on horseback, followed by Sylphy, with whom I was riding with again. I'd wanted to take Eris up on her offer, but I needed to be further back so I could assume my position if necessary. The carriage with Ariel and her attendants was a few lengths behind us, with Luke bringing up the rear on his horse. As we moved cautiously down the single path through the woods, we approached a sharp curve with poor visibility. There was a mark carved into a small tree just before the bend which looked a bit like a $sign. This was a signal Orsted and I had worked out in advance. It meant there was an ambush waiting for us just ahead. Apparently, I wouldn't need to resort to faking an attack on my own party. Gripping my staff tightly, I activated my Eye of Foresight and fed mana to the Zaelif Gauntlet so I could use the Stone of Absorption in its palm at any time. Poison darts or arrows might come flying from the woods at any moment. They might even hit us with a high-tier offensive spell. With my eye activated, I'd be capable of responding to either situation. As it turned out, that wasn't necessary. Maybe a dozen armored soldiers waited for us around the curve, blocking the road completely.
Whoo. Whoo.
Eris and Ghislaine drew their horses to a sharp halt, then paused. The armored soldiers didn't respond to Ghislaine's words of challenge. Their full-face helmets hid their expressions completely. One of them had a large, colorful plume on their helm. Could that be Obey? No, it was probably just their captain. Aber was supposed to be much flashier. The soldiers remained silent, but didn't move. They clearly had no intention of letting us pass.
Hop off, Rudy.
I got off the horse and backed up closer to the carriage. Sylphy promptly spurred her horse forward, positioning herself between Eris and Ghislaine.
I am Fitz, Guardian Mage. Are you aware that this carriage carries Ariel Anamoy Asura, second princess of Asura? Who are you, and who do you serve?
Wow, that girl can sound really intimidating when she wants to. The plumed soldier didn't say a word in a response. Instead, he drew his sword. The rest of the soldiers quickly followed his lead, filling the air with the sound of ringing metal. In that same moment, many more armored soldiers emerged from the forest on either side of the road. The majority carried swords, but I saw a few with staffs as well.
We're under attack.
I risked a quick glance backward. Luke had already gotten off his horse and assumed his position in the rear, watching our backs. Elamoy was frozen in the driver's seat of the carriage, gripping the reins with a tense expression on her face. I could see Clean inside the carriage itself, disguised as Princess Ariel, Everyone was in position, in other words. I turned my attention back to the soldiers in front of us. Eris and Ghislaine were already barging into the enemy's front line, cutting down the heavily armored soldiers like wheat. Their strokes so swift I couldn't even see them. The enemy had drawn their weapons first, but we'd still gotten the first blow. That was how just fast those two were.
I'll take care of the magic.
Sylphy called, countering a spell as it flew in their direction. So there were mages some distance behind the main force, although I couldn't see them from my position. The enemies I could see numbered more than 30 at this point. More were still springing out of the forest, so their actual force was surely larger. But against the likes of Eris and Ghislaine, mere numbers didn't mean much. They were thinning the enemy's ranks faster than the enemy could replenish them. Eris moved quickly and impulsively. Ghislaine followed close behind, covering her blind spots. And Sylphy supported them both with quick, accurate spells. Together, they were cutting efficiently through the entire squad of trained fighters, never giving the enemy a chance to surround them. I knew all three of them were skilled, of course, but even so, I was a bit surprised by how smoothly they were working together. I guess they'd gotten used to working as a team during our expedition to the library labyrinth. In any case, they seemed to have the situation under control for now. Luke, are there any enemies coming at us from behind?
None!
Weird. It's like they're inviting us to retreat, huh? Maybe it's a trap? Yeah, I'm thinking trap.
Should we fall back?
No, I think we can break through them. Let's push forward, and... I turned my attention back to the front lines and trailed off mid-sentence. The enemy ranks had parted suddenly, and someone was striding forward through them. Eris and Ghislaine stopped dead in their tracks. The new arrival was less imposing than I'd expected. He was less than a meter tall, in fact. It was a halfling in full body armor, polished, shining body armor. His squat little body was gleaming so brightly that I was reminded of a disco ball. Still, the enemy soldiers looked visibly relieved to see him stepping forward. They clearly had some respect for his skills. Was this little guy a master swordsman? Maybe even Aber himself?
I am the North King Waita, one of the three blades of the North God. They call me Light and Darkness.
Disgusted do they really, though? Never heard of you.
I take you for the Black Wolf Ghislaine, madam. I challenge you to a duel.
With those words, the walking disco ball drew his sword. The thing was made to match his proportions, so it was only around 30 centimeters long. Just like his armor, though, its blade gleamed brilliantly. I wasn't sure why he was asking for a one-on-one duel with our strongest single fighter, given that his forces significantly outnumbered us. Maybe he had some kind of trick up his sleeve?
Ha 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 ha. Very well then. I am Ghislaine, the Black Wolf of the Sword God style. Your challenge is accepted.
This seemed to bring the formalities to an end. Ghislaine squared off against her foe, holding her sword at her waist. For everyone else, it felt like time had stopped moving. The enemy soldiers had broken off their advance and were watching at a distance. Sylphy glanced in my direction, then took a few steps back as well, keeping a watchful eye on the enemy soldiers. The North King's sudden arrival had turned a chaotic melee into a tense, dramatic stalemate. It might have stayed that way too, but Eris apparently hadn't noticed the change. Now that Ghislaine had the North King occupied, she took the opportunity to charge straight at the passive enemy soldiers.
Oh, Eris, wait.
Startled, Sylphy hurried forward to lend her support. Within seconds, Eris was right back in the thick of a wild battle with Sylphy covering her back. Could those two hold out on their own? There were a lot of enemies, but for the moment they hadn't even grazed anyone on our side. Yeah, they seemed to have it under control. I wanted to join in, of course, but I couldn't risk moving or using any spells right now. For one thing, Eris's wild charge had opened up a dangerous amount of space between our front line and the carriage that we needed to protect. And more importantly, Aber hadn't shown himself yet. I had to stay put until I saw him. The North Emperor was an expert when it came to surprise attacks. His favorite strategy was to wait until his target was distracted, then pop up behind and cut them down. The concept was extremely simple, but his timing was flawless. He'd come for you in the one brief moment where your mind was elsewhere or your attention flagged. When facing powerful mages, he particularly liked to attack them right after they cast a spell. For that reason, Orsted had firmly warned me not to use any magic in this battle if Aber wasn't visible, even if my allies were in danger. It was just too risky. As long as I waited patiently enough, Aber would eventually change his target from me to someone else, who'd let down their guard. The instant he appeared would be my best chance to take him out. Because of all this, I really wanted to stay put for now. My most important job at the moment was keeping a careful watch on everything around me. This was going worse than expected, though. We hadn't anticipated that a North King would be here as well. If Aber had any other powerful allies waiting in the wings, we might have to risk a retreat.
What's the matter, Black Wolf? Not so bold now, are you?
As it was, Ghislaine wasn't faring that well against Waita. Her movements were kind of strange, honestly. Whenever she started to attack the halfling swordsman, she'd pause momentarily to look away, and Waita always took advantage of those opportunities. Moving with remarkable speed for such a rotund little man, he would dart right up to her and launch a series of quick thrusts. Ghislaine managed to evade these attacks, but it was forcing her back, and he had landed a few grazing blows that left her bleeding. For some reason, Ghislaine couldn't get on the offensive. I kept seeing her about to swing her sword, only to flinch to the side and let Waita take advantage of the opening. The halfling was doing something to her, but I couldn't tell what it was from where I stood. I turned my attention to Waita and watched his movements closely. The little disco ball's armor was shining so brightly that it was hard to even look at him honestly. When he wasn't on the offensive, he seemed to be keeping a set distance from Ghislaine. Every now and then, he'd swing his left hand forward, although he wasn't holding anything in it. Could he be using some kind of magic? Just after he moved his left hand, I saw Ghislaine flinch once again. Maybe he was throwing something in her face? Some kind of sand or powder? No, that didn't feel right. I was staring right at his hand and I didn't see him throwing anything. Sometimes he didn't even point his hand directly at her. But there was definitely a connection between that movement and the way Ghislaine kept hesitating. Wait, I get it. He was hitting her with light. He was using that mirror-like gauntlet to deliberately reflect the sun right into Ghislaine's eyes, dazzling her in the moment she tried to attack. Talk about a cheap trick. It was surprisingly effective, though. At this rate, Ghislaine might actually lose. I had to decide whether I should intervene. This wasn't looking good, and if I hesitated now, I might lose my chance to help. Damn it. What do I do? I didn't know for sure if Abel was even here. Was I going to watch Ghislaine die because I was too scared of some guy who might be 100 miles away? All right, let's do it. Channeling mana into my staff, I formed a combination earth and water spell, a loose variation of my go-to spell, Quagmire. Mud rain. Dark clouds covered the sky, and chocolate-colored rain poured down across the battlefield. This was nothing more than muddy water with no offensive effects whatsoever, but once it hit the ground, it quickly transformed into a soupy morass, throwing off the enemy troops. Within seconds, the armored soldiers were slipping and falling over each other. Eris and Ghislaine had trained to fight in any conditions, so the mud didn't affect them much. Sylphy wasn't bothered either, although her hair quickly took on an unpleasant brown tint.
What is this trickery?
But unfortunately for Waita, his beautifully polished armor was now covered in sludge, which meant its reflective effect had disappeared entirely. Ghislaine's roar of challenge echoed through the forest as she whipped her blade forward from the hip. Waita tumbled nimbly to one side, but he was too slow to react, and Ghislaine's sword of light was too fast. There was a loud metallic clang, and Waita fell back with blood spraying violently from his shoulder. Okay, we're good. Now back to looking for Aber. I spun around to check the area behind me. Oh! And the guy was standing right there. His appearance was eccentric, to say the least. He wore a rainbow coat with loose pants that only reached his knees and carried 3 swords at his hip. There was a colorful tattoo of a peacock on his cheek. but his gravity-defying satellite dish hairdo was just as striking. Dirt poured off his drab brown cloak as he pushed his way through the trees. The path he'd made led back to a nearby hole perfectly positioned outside of Luke's range of vision. The man had been hiding behind us all along, in a hole in the ground. His outfit and his approach to combat matched Orsted's description perfectly. This had to be the North Emperor Aber.
My goodness, you actually noticed me.
Fearful in the next moment, my eye of foresight showed me Aber moving. He brandishes the sword in his right hand.
But I'm afraid a mage stands no chance at this distance. Goodbye, my friend.
Fearful, he swings his sword down. Reflectively, I brought my left hand forward. The Zaelif gauntlet I wore felt all but weightless, but Ober was still going to be faster. I did have one last card to play, though. Fly, my hand!
Whoa!
At my command, the gauntlet launched itself forward with incredible speed. But Aubert had sensed the danger and rolled backward at the last moment, just managing to get out of the way. The gauntlet slammed into a tree somewhere far behind him. Wide-eyed, Ober looked back toward the gauntlet, then back at me.
Well, that was certainly peculiar.
Fearful, it seemed I'd startled him. That was good, since I wasn't especially calm myself right now. My heart was pounding fiercely in my chest. I'd known Albert was going to try something. Orsted had warned me in advance, but I'd ignored his advice and landed myself in a mess. I had to hold him off by myself. My enemy was an Emperor-class swordmaster. Ambushes might be his specialty, but that didn't mean he was weak in a duel. The one thing I had going for me was that Orsted had also told me how to fight effectively against his style. Calm down, man. You're strong. You got this! You're number one. I'm strong. I'm strong. I'm Stallone. The Italian stallion.
So, you're Quagmire Rudeus,
Right. I already have a nickname. And I'm not a boxer. I'm just Rudeus. For some reason, Auber wasn't attacking. He was just standing there and talking to me.
I've heard plenty about you, but I see there's some truth behind the rumors. This might be something of a challenge.
Why was he hesitating? I couldn't counter his attacks unless he went on the offensive. Where did you hear about me?
Oh, this was back when I was teaching a certain wild beast how to use the sword. The little creature was always going on about how incredible you are.
Wait, what? This guy knows Eris?
I knew a man capable of charming that young tiger had to be a peculiar sort, but I never imagined you could actually shoot your hand off like a rocket.
It sounded like my robot punch had made a big impression. He seemed to be watching me warily, in case I had any other tricks up my sleeve. He seemed to think I was some kind of sideshow. I would have been offended, but his cautious attitude suited me just fine. In the corner of my eye, I saw that Ghislaine had chased off Waita and was heading our way. Once she got over here and made this a 2-on-1 fight, our odds of victory went.
Eris Ghislaine, Silent Fitz, and Quagmire Rudeus. I brought along Waita mostly as a precaution, really. But now that I've failed to finish you off, this might prove rather challenging.
Auber paused for a moment, then nodded to himself. Was he finally going to make his move?
But a worthy challenge is all welcome.
It sure sounded that way. Fortunately, all I had to do was hold him off for a few seconds. Once Ghislaine was here, we could hit him from both sides, and I knew most of the moves he was likely to open with. I could do this. We could take him out.
My name is Abercorb, the North Emperor.
Returning the sword in his right hand to its sheath, Auber drew another with his left hand. I channeled mana into my staff, ready to intercept his charge.
And I shall now hereby dear, my friends.
Surprised at which point he spun around and ran off, not toward me, but directly back at Ghislaine. Surprised. What? Is he?
Arbor.
Oh, my! Hello there, Ghislaine. It seems
So
you haven't changed a whit, my dear.
Aber grabbed one of many small bags from his coat and tossed it in Ghislaine's direction. It arced slowly toward her. Reflexively, she slashed it apart in midair. The thing exploded into a cloud of what looked like smoke, which then hit her right in the face. This wasn't good. Stone cannon!
Goodness!
My spell was targeted precisely at Aber's back, but he dodged it easily without even glancing my way. Ghislaine could have followed up on this opportunity. Unfortunately, she was too busy sneezing and wiping the tears from her eyes. He'd apparently hit her with some kind of pepper spray equivalent. Aber didn't slow down to attack her, though. Instead, he scuttled past her like a cockroach and sprinted to the front lines of the battle, where Ariel and Sylphy were on the verge of wiping out his forces.
Retreat! Fall back! We'll have to try this one again.
The surviving soldiers turned to flee into the forest, and Eris's head snapped around. She hadn't noticed Aber until now, but she reacted quickly, leaping in front of Sylphy to meet his charge.
Grah!
My blade be as a flaming tor!
With this brief incantation, Aber's sword burst into flame. Sidestepping nimbly past Eris's attack, he grabbed something from his hip and brought it to his mouth. I'd heard about this move from Orsted, and I had time to react.
Fool!
Water wall. Aber spat out all the oil in his mouth at once, igniting it with his burning sword. A stream of flame rushed toward Eris. But just before it could reach her, the fire hit the wall of water I'd summoned up at the last moment and was instantly extinguished. Eris didn't even flinch. She slashed her sword diagonally from a point high above her head, looking to slice through both my wall and the enemy in one stroke.
Ta!
Her sword was too fast to see, but I heard her strike hit home. She'd cut Aber in two. The upper half of him tumbled to the ground. Happy we got him. But for some reason, Eris just clicked her tongue in irritation. On second examination, I realized that the thing lying on the ground in front of her wasn't Ober's body after all. It was a log, an ordinary wooden log, wrapped in a dirty brown cloak. Surprised, I'd been watching the entire thing with my eye of foresight active, but I had no idea what I'd just seen. A moment later, something came flying through the air toward the log. It was a metal claw tied to a rope. The claw snagged hold of the cloak, then jerked quickly backward, pulling it through the air to fall at the feet of the man who held the rope. That was Ober, of course. Somehow, he was standing off in the forest wearing a different cloak, this one camouflaged with a layer of grass and flowers. Instead of fleeing right away, he had taken the trouble to retrieve his brown cloak. That meant it was valuable to him. Maybe it was a magic item that allowed him to swap places with whatever the other cloak was wrapped around. That would explain the disappearing act. The guy's some kind of ninja. You could have warned me about that trick, boss.
You've improved considerably, Mad Dog. I'll take my leave for now, but I look forward to our next encounter.
Hey! Get back here.
Don't follow him. There are still soldiers in those woods. You can't run off on your own.
Neutral, Eris shot a hopeful glance in my direction. I just shook my head. For a moment she gazed regretfully in the direction Aber had fled, but eventually she sheathed her sword with a grumpy, "Huh." With her prey gone for now, Eris came towards me. Sylphy was keeping a careful eye on our surroundings, her rod still in her hand, but it seemed like the enemy had completely disappeared. The only armored soldiers I could see were the ones we'd killed in battle. I breathed a small sigh of relief. We'd managed to survive their first attack, at least. That didn't mean we could relax, of course. Aber could hit us again at any time, especially if we got sloppy. At the very least, we'd have to stay on alert until night fell. Neutral, in the aftermath of the battle, we took some time to review the situation. The enemy squad had been nearly wiped out, and we'd emerged basically unscathed. Ghislaine was sniffling and sneezing for about an hour, but that was the worst of it. I got a little worried when both healing and detoxification magic didn't help with her condition, but it improved quickly once we tried washing out her eyes with a water spell. It was surprising how many things healing spells couldn't fix, really. They probably wouldn't work on pollen allergies. Either although I hadn't really encountered such things in this world. Before moving on, we decided to dispose of the bodies of our would-be assassins. I would have just left them where they were, but we were in the middle of a forest. Their bodies would turn undead if they stayed out too long, and there was something of a taboo against abandoning corpses, just in general. Our whole party got to work stripping off their armor, dumping anything that looked like a personal possession in a pile, then burning the bodies themselves. Partway through this process, I noticed that Luke looked distressed. In fact, his face was getting noticeably paler with every passing minute. It wasn't like he'd never seen a dead body before, though. He seemed to be fixated on the soldier's armor in particular.
Luke, isn't this crest,
The reason for his reaction became clear soon enough. Among the many soldiers we'd killed, a decent number had a specific crest engraved on their armor. It was the symbol of the Milbots region, and by extension of the Asuran lord who controlled it. Milbots was a rich territory ruled by one of the 4 great noble houses of Asura, and apparently their troops had been dispatched to join the attempt on our lives.
I can't believe it.
It was all too clear what this meant. Pile of men noticed Greyrat, the lord of the Milbots region, had betrayed Princess Ariel. Chapter 3, Suspicions and Theories. An hour after the attack, we pitched camp in a spot fairly deep inside the woods. I encircled our campfire with a low stone wall to keep the light from giving our location away, and we settled down for a full-fledged strategy meeting.
This can't be. It doesn't make any sense.
Luke was still muttering to himself, his expression stunned and disbelieving. Ever since we spotted the crest of Milbots on the armor of those soldiers, he'd been off in his own world, struggling to come to terms with what he'd seen. It felt fairly obvious that his father had betrayed Ariel's cause and dispatched those soldiers to murder her, but I guess he didn't want to believe it. In contrast to his shocked reaction, Ariel and her other allies seemed to have taken the news in stride. I got the feeling they'd viewed this as a possibility all along. I had to wonder why Luke seemed this surprised. Obviously, Paimon was his father, so that probably had something to do with it. But maybe the man-god had been whispering half-truths in his ear as well. Maybe he just found out that his new friend wasn't being entirely honest with him, which seemed plausible. The man-god tended to keep a lot of things to himself, especially when the facts were inconvenient. Maybe this was a chance to confirm my suspicions. No, not yet. Let's get the conversation moving in the right direction first. Your Highness, there's something we should discuss.
Oh, neutral, yes. Rudeus, what is it?
Arbor shouted, "We'll have to try this one again," as he fled. I think it's very likely that he'll be launching repeated ambushes on us at some point in this forest, and maybe even after we cross the border.
Neutral, yes. I imagine so. What's your point?
Neutral, the look on her face suggested that she'd expected all this from the very beginning. We managed to ward him off this time, but Arbor seems to be even more dangerous than I expected, and he has a lot of troops at his disposal. It looks like they're deadly serious about taking you out. I think their next ambush will be much more carefully planned and dangerous.
Neutral, you think we might not prevail?
I nodded firmly. It's hard to say for sure at the moment, but I'd expect their next attack might come right at the border fortress itself. They could easily have laid a trap for us there, and it won't be easy to break through by force.
Perhaps so, but there are no teleportation circles active within Asura. We have no choice but to press forward.
So far, this conversation was going exactly as I'd hoped. Ariel was making this very easy for me. It felt like she already suspected what I was getting at. Neutral. Right. We do need to press on, but that doesn't mean we have to blunder right into a trap that we know is waiting for us.
Oh? Are you saying there's some way we might cross the border without passing through the border checkpoint?
Neutral, yes.
What did you have in mind?
At some point, many of the others around the campfire had started listening intently to our conversation. It made this feel a bit more awkward, but I pushed on anyway. Neutral, I'm familiar with a group of bandits based nearby that primarily makes a living by smuggling goods and trading slaves across the border. With their assistance, we could make it to Ariel brought a hand to her chin and considered this. Sylphy was staring at me with a slightly dubious look on her face. Eris and Ghislaine didn't seem to be paying attention.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you previously argue that we should avoid resorting to any shady business?
Yes, and I still feel that way. But I think I misjudged how serious our predicament is. I don't think we can afford to be too choosy about our methods at the moment.
I see. What do you think, Sylphy?
It sounds reasonable to me. I don't know how much we can trust these bandits, but I do trust Rudy's judgment. If he says it's less dangerous this way, I believe him.
Sylphy's words sounded sincere enough, but there was a hint of displeasure in her voice. I think she was a bit upset I hadn't mentioned any of this to her beforehand, but if I had discussed the possibility with anyone ahead of time, it would have made me look awfully suspicious when Auber popped up to push us in the right direction.
Ah.
The man raised his head slowly, almost like a zombie, and fixed his eyes on me. There was something like hostility in them.
What are you playing at here, Rudeus? Your behavior in that battle was strange. It felt as if you knew Auber was going to launch that sneak attack.
Neutral, I anticipated he might try something. Yeah.
It almost seemed like you knew all about his combat style.
Well, I do have the eye of foresight, remember? And why do you know all this anyway, Luke? You were supposed to be watching our backs. Auber was in your blind spot, wasn't he?
Auber certainly retreated quickly from that battle, and cleanly.
True. I imagine he would have played it differently if he'd managed to kill me with that first attack.
Couldn't you have stopped him from escaping, if you really wanted to?
Maybe if I used a spell with a large enough area of effect, but I would have hit Eris and Ghislaine as well, and there's a good chance he would have escaped anyway, thanks to that weird magic cloak. Hey now, it sounds like you're implying that I might be working with Auber behind the scenes, buddy. Well, this actually made some sense, now that I thought about it. Telling Luke that I was allied with Auber and Darius would be the easiest way for the man god to manipulate him, at least in the short term. The thing was, that whole idea would fall apart if you just thought about it for 5 minutes. Get it together, man. I know you're upset about your dad trying to kill us and everything, but I'm not the enemy here. Come on, Luke. You're the one who asked me to help Princess Ariel, remember?
I did, yes, but none of this makes any sense. Why did my father betray us? It wasn't supposed to be that way.
What was that supposed to mean? This was getting stranger by the second. I was feeling increasingly convinced that the man god had told Luke something, although it was hard to say exactly what. Wait a minute. What if the man god can't see Luke right now? I was wearing that bracelet Orsted had given me, and it supposedly acted as a kind of jammer that blocked the man god's sight. There was a chance he had foretold events inaccurately in his conversations with Luke. Another possibility also came to mind. Maybe the man god had decided Luke wasn't useful anymore and abandoned him entirely.
You got something you want to say, or what?
The girl was glaring at Luke threateningly from across the fire. I felt like she was on the verge of taking a swing at him. Sylphy didn't say anything, but her eyes were darting warily from me and Luke and back again. Ghislaine just looked puzzled. Mind games were never exactly her strong suit, I guess.
Your Highness, I'm opposed to this plan. Rudeus's behavior makes me fear he's hiding something.
Neutral, does it?
We have no proof whatsoever that these bandits are trustworthy. I agree that it would be unwise to pass through the checkpoint, but I think our best option is to turn back for now and ask Lord Perugius for assistance.
Ask Perugius for help, huh? There was definitely some logic to that. If the man lent us a handful of his servant spirits, we could come back and overwhelm our enemies. Sure, it felt like a reasonable alternative. As long as Ariel made it through this alive, I didn't mind that much either way. The only reason I was pushing the bandit plan was that I wanted to meet up with Triss, and maybe I could go off to handle that on my own. Still, there was a risk that Ariel might get assassinated in my absence.
Then Neutral am like clean. What do you two think?
Neutral, Sir Luke has my support. Now.
The attendants were both on Luke's side as well. That put things at 3-2 in their favor. Of course, Asura wasn't a democracy. Quite the opposite. At the end of the day, Ariel's vote was the only one that really mattered. Well, if the decision went against me, I'd just have to go meet Triss on my own. I could always say I was going to scout ahead inside Asura while they doubled back or something. They might get suspicious if I went alone, so I could ask Sylphy or Eris to tag along. Ariel didn't ask Eris or Ghislaine for their opinions. Instead, she fell silent for a while, lowering her eyes and gazing deeply into the fire. She was clearly lost in thought.
Neutral? All right.
After a while, she looked up again. Her gaze moved between mine and Luke's several times, then came to rest on Luke's eyes.
We're going to go with Rudeus's plan.
What? But why? But why?
I don't believe Lord Perugius will be inclined to recognize a woman who fled to safety at the first sign of trouble as the rightful queen of Asura. We mustn't turn to him unless it's absolutely necessary.
As she spoke those words, Ariel sent a quick, meaningful glance in my direction. What was the message there? Was she taking my side on this for a reason? I didn't entirely understand. It was convenient, of course, but I couldn't see why she'd chosen to trust me over Luke. That made me feel a little uneasy.
But with this plan, you're risking your very life. Are we really going to turn to bandits for help instead? For all we know, Rudeus is planning to sell you to them as...
Luke, what's the matter with you all of a sudden? You can't really believe that Rudeus would do such a thing, can you?
But my father...
Lord Pylaman has likely betrayed us, yes, but we'd always known that was a possibility. You yourself once warned me that he might do so under certain circumstances.
Well, yes, perhaps I did. But I know I heard that he...
Luke stopped himself abruptly, bringing his hand to his mouth. I blinked in surprise. Ariel looked somewhat startled also. Her eyes went wide, and I saw her lips tremble slightly.
Luke, I don't want to even consider this, but has my brother...
Ariel trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. If she completed that sentence and accused Luke of disloyalty, there was a chance she'd be forced to break her ties with him here and now. I think she probably realized that herself. Ultimately, she found a different and less risky approach.
Luke Nodos Greyrat, tell me what you are.
Luke looked up, startled, to meet her gaze. His eyes moved briefly to the worried faces of Sylphy, Elamoy, and Clean, then returned to Ariel. Without breaking her gaze, he kneeled in front of her and spoke.
I am your knight.
That's correct. And I am your princess?
Ariel nodded firmly, and Luke lowered his head. They both seemed almost rejuvenated in that moment. They'd figured out what mattered most and put it into words. Nothing else really mattered. Sylphy and the attendants looked relieved as well. Those two did have a special bond. That much was for sure.
Well then, let's get moving right away. Rudeus, will you lead the way?
All right. In the end, our party would be seeking help from the local bandits after all. Luke wasn't about to betray us. Still, I felt more uneasy than before. That conversation had confirmed, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he was a disciple of the man-god. The first step was to head back to the main road through the forest. I knew how to get us to the bandits' territory. One of the rocks by the roadside would be marked with a certain symbol. All we had to do was head into the woods right there and head due east. The group made their home on the far eastern edge of this forest, under a steep rock face at the foot of a mountain. Once we entered the forest again, our speed dropped dramatically. The main issue was that we had to disassemble the carriage and load it on the horses. Ariel stayed on horseback for a time, but as we traveled deeper into the woods, she ended up getting down to walk. There were so many trees and tangled roots all around us that anyone riding was at risk of being thrown off their mount. Heading due east was simple enough in theory, but the forest was so thick that we struggled mightily to navigate it. We had to pull the horses along, forcing our way through wherever we could. Sometimes I even resorted to blasting a path open with my magic. Neutral clearing trees like this wasn't the best idea. It was a clear sign that we'd passed through that area, after all. But we'd leave traces of our presence any time we had to fight a monster anyway, so there was no chance we could hide our tracks completely. Our group was large and burdened down, and most of us weren't exactly masters of stealth. There was no point worrying about it. We stopped for breaks numerous times. It was mostly for Ariel's sake, since her legs were aching terribly. She probably wasn't used to walking through this kind of terrain. Still, she took the pain stoically. We were only pausing long enough for her to catch her breath while Sylphy used healing magic on her legs. We all barely spoke, and in the absence of conversation, your thoughts tend to wander. I don't know what the others were thinking about as we trudged along in silence, but my thoughts turned to the man-god, his disciples, and the things he might have told them. Specifically, I was trying to figure out what advice he might have given Luke. It seemed safe to say that he had told Luke something, but it was unclear when this had happened, and what he had said. Based on my own experience, the man-god didn't hand out his little hints that frequently. Sometimes he repeatedly showed up in a brief span of time, but his visits were generally spaced out annually. Assuming the same was true for Luke, he'd probably only gotten one prophecy so far, or maybe two. I could think of at least one possibility. Before that trip to the library labyrinth, Luke had come to ask me for my help. Maybe the man-god had told him something like, "Go ask Rudeus to join forces with you." It'll work out to Ariel's advantage. It was a good explanation for his actions at the time. Cast by Artale Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Judging from Luke's reaction to the attack today, however, I had to think he'd gotten another visit or two after that. This time he had snapped at me at every opportunity. He seemed convinced that I was the culprit behind everything that was going wrong. Maybe the man-god had told him, Rudeus is planning to seize control of the Nodos house or something. That was just ridiculous, though. Anyone could see I wasn't remotely interested. I wouldn't be living all the way up in Sharia if I gave a damn about Asuran politics, right? Hell, I'd avoided Ariel for years because I didn't want to get mixed up in all that. That said, Luke might feel very differently. Everyone thinks of whatever they want most as incredibly valuable, right? And if you hear someone wants to steal it from you, well, you'll probably get suspicious. Surprised. Wait, did that mean Luke was dying to be the next head of the Nodos family? Never would have guessed it, to be honest. Anyway, there wasn't much point speculating about this endlessly. I had to wait and hope for more information. What about High Minister Darius Silvaganius? Orsted was convinced he was the man-god's second disciple, and I was inclined to agree. At this point, it would be shocking if he wasn't. What was the man-god whispering in his ear? At the very least, he probably warned the man that Ariel was on her way back to court. Ariel believed that he'd anticipated her return from the moment the king fell ill. Even so, it seemed unlikely that he'd dispatched a force this strong on the basis of a hunch. The North Emperor, Abur, and the North King, Waita, were both key weapons in his arsenal. Would he really have sent them here unless he knew for a fact that Ariel was coming? The safer play would have been to keep them close to discourage the second prince from trying anything. We'd also teleported to this forest. It was hard to say how fast information could travel from the city of Sharia to Asura, but it seemed impossible that he'd sent those two up here after hearing about Ariel's departure. Finally, there was the fact that Ober had come straight for me instead of trying to assassinate Princess Ariel. They seemed to be aware of who I was and my abilities. Was there a chance that Darius's real target was me, rather than the princess? It probably didn't matter either way. The two of us were dangerous to both Darius and the man-god. There was no need to manipulate the man like Luke. The man-god just needed to provide him with accurate information. The identity of the third disciple was still unclear. It seemed that Pylamon Greyrat had betrayed Ariel. Was there a chance that was the man-god's doing? Probably not, actually. In the future recorded in that diary, Eris had been staying at Pylamon's mansion, and Eris was a member of the Boreas family who were loyal to the first prince. That seemed to imply that Pylamon would have betrayed Ariel no matter what. Plus, in terms of his capabilities and influence, the man was basically just a less useful version of Darius. All in all, it felt unlikely that the man-god had chosen him. What about Abra then? From the sound of things, he brought Waital along because he knew about the members of our party. Then again, that was information Darius could easily have given him. It seemed premature to make conclusions about Abra based on our single meeting. Clearly, he was particularly wary of me, but again, that could easily be due to something Darius had said. One way or the other, we'd probably end up having to kill the man. I'd been thinking this over for a while now, but I hadn't reached any real conclusions or hit upon any brilliant insights. Oh well. Speaking of Ober, though, that guy really did have a bizarre combat style. He clearly carried all sorts of strange items, magical and otherwise, and knew exactly how to use them. There was more where that pepper spray and oil had come from, without a doubt, and it was easy to fixate on his flashy, peculiar tricks, but, according to Orsted, he was also formidable in an ordinary sword fight. I'd gotten an accurate description of the guy beforehand. Still, hearing him described was very different from actually seeing him in action. I didn't feel like I'd let down my guard or made any glaring mistakes. At that moment, Ghislaine had really needed my help, but he'd still taken that brief opportunity to sneak up behind me. The next time we met, I really wanted to take him out for good. Orsted had warned me that the man was practically impossible to track down once he got out of your sight. Despite his brightly colored costume, he was somehow capable of just melting into the trees. He'd earned his title clearly, although he honestly felt less like a North Emperor or a peacock blade than a ninja master. Hadn't been expecting to find any of those guys in this world. The place was just full of surprises. I might have to try making my own version of that pepper bomb thing. Or maybe the oil capsule. We kept moving all evening, but eventually it grew too dark to continue. We pitched our camp in the woods and set up a rotating watch as usual. I took this opportunity to make my second report to Orsted. After that battle, there was a great deal I needed to tell him about.
So Aber got away, then?
Sad, yes. I'm sorry. I know you told me how to handle him, but...
It's all right. It takes time to put advice into practice. And once Aber decided to flee, you had essentially no chance of catching him.
After making the call to retreat, Aber's movements had been very swift and decisive. He had all sorts of attacks, feints, and diversions, and he'd used a magic item I wasn't familiar with. Orsted was likely familiar with all his tricks and strategies, but there was no way I could anticipate them all perfectly. When you put it that way, couldn't Orsted just go on ahead and kill him for us? Well, it probably wasn't wise to ask too much of the boss. Leaning on him constantly would not be good in the long run. Dealing with Aber was a job he delegated to me. I needed to find a way to get it done. What was the deal with that Waita guy, though?
Someone must have summoned him here, I suppose. It was likely the man-god's suggestion.
Do you have any information on him? It wouldn't hurt to get a better idea of what that halfling was capable of, at least.
They call the man Light and Darkness. He's a North King with a bizarre style and a pupil of Kalman III. I believe he served the Nodos family for many years as a bodyguard.
The Nodos family? Maybe he taught Paul how to fight back in the day?
As his nickname suggests, he's a master of optical trickery. During the daytime, he uses his polished armor as a mirror to blind his enemies. At night, he covers himself in ink and uses thick black smoke to hide himself in the darkness. You'll want to make his armor dirty in the day or light up the area with fire magic at night.
Makes sense. Once you knew how his gimmick worked, he didn't sound like an especially intimidating opponent.
As long as you counteract his tactics, Eris or Ghislaine should be able to handle him, but be aware that his skill with the sword is genuine. Don't let down your guard for an instant.
So the cheap tricks were just there to give him a little edge then? That made sense. You couldn't make it to a rank like North King with nothing but a couple of weird gimmicks.
In any case, I doubt Waita was the only one they summoned. I'd expect they've hired others as well.
Other North King level masters?
I wouldn't expect any sword kings, but you might encounter water kings, water saints, and perhaps a sword saint.
You think they hired every sword master they could get to overwhelm us with numbers?
I doubt Darius would spend so lavishly on other bodyguards with the water god already on his side. I would guess there's another one or two at worst.
The water god was the ultimate trump card. It made sense that they'd gotten a little cocky after securing her services. The man god might have pestered them to bolster their forces further, but I could see Darius brushing off that advice.
However, All the three blades of the North God should be in Asura at this time. There is a possibility they were hired as a group.
Surprised at three blades of the North God? I don't think I've heard of them before.
Ah, yes. I'll explain.
Apparently, this was the name that a group of 4 top-class North God swordsmen had given themselves as a way of asserting their supremacy. All of them used particularly strange techniques and had a strong craving for the spotlight. Orsted went over the list of members and offered a few comments on how to deal with them. Then we moved on to the next topic. So what do you think about this situation with Luke?
It's a positive sign, because he has the gift of foresight. The man-god is inexperienced at conventional prediction. When he manipulates multiple disciples at once, it's common for him to undermine himself in this way.
Basically, the man-god had been giving advice to his disciples, without really thinking through the effects it might have on the others. Luke's stunned reaction today suggested an inconsistency between his reality and the advice that Darius or Auber had received. The man-god's prophecies were accurate, but he'd probably lied to Luke about something else. That tended to be his style. He'd tell you anything at all if he thought it would make you do what he wanted. It did occur to me that the man-god might have abandoned Luke at this point. Also,
That's entirely possible. Luke's destiny is weak, so I doubt the man-god ever viewed him as a particularly valuable pawn. His main role was likely just to keep an eye on your movements. And with me close by, he's no longer even capable of that.
but the man-god only has 3 pawns to play with, right? Would he really use one for just that purpose?
The man-god can see everything, and any exceptions to that rule are terrifying to him. He had every motivation to keep watch over you.
Okay, I think I get it. The man-god's vision was the ability he relied on most heavily, and we prevented him from using it against me. Without Luke to monitor me indirectly, he wouldn't even be able to anticipate any possible changes to the future. He'd have to fight us blind, guessing at our next move without a single hint, and he was terrible at predicting things. When you put it that way, it seemed unlikely that he had let Luke go completely. If nothing else, his presence would limit our options going forward. Do you think it's all right to leave Luke be for the time being, then?
Yes, but be on your guard. When the man-god sees no further use for a disciple, he'll often spur them to act in reckless, absurd ways.
Yeah, I guess so. One time he even threw this whimpering sad sack up against the dragon god himself.
If he takes any dramatic action, kill him.
Before it comes to that, I'd like to try reaching out to him, at least once.
What do you suggest discussing with him?
I want to ask him if the man-god's speaking to him, and find out what advice he was given. If possible, I'd try to convince him not to trust the man-god. Maybe even get him to act as a sort of double agent for us. I didn't feel too optimistic about my chances. Luke clearly thought I was suspicious. The man-god had probably told him something about my intentions. I almost certainly hadn't built up enough trust with Luke to convince him to take my word for all this. We weren't exactly friends or anything, you know?
I don't think it will accomplish anything, but feel free to try.
Okay, at least I got permission. Now it was just a matter of finding the right moment to take my shot. Hopefully this wouldn't backfire on me spectacularly.
For the moment, things are going smoothly enough. The man-god hasn't been able to disrupt our plans efficiently. Keep it up, Rudeus.
Happy, yes, sir. With our second meeting at an end, I bowed to Orsted and hurried back through the woods. Things are going smoothly enough. That was true, now that I thought about it. The plan had always been to fight Auber at the Red Worm's Whiskers, then join up with Triss. There had been some unexpected details and minor complications, but nothing severe enough to knock us totally off track. I had reason to be confident. I understood all that on some level. Still, I didn't feel confident at the moment. Things were going so well that I was actually getting anxious. I could sense some kind of danger, but it felt like it was hiding somewhere just outside my field of view. The whole thing with Luke was part of it, probably. Orsted didn't seem concerned at all. Maybe that was just because he hadn't actually seen everything I had today. Maybe he could sense something a little off as well, but wasn't worried by it. Or maybe I was just overthinking things. I wished I had some idea what was going on in Orsted's head. There weren't any major problems at the moment, so we were staying put. I could understand that. Thrashing around blindly only made matters worse, most of the time. Back in my old world, people used to say it's better to try and fail than to fail because you didn't try. But that only applies when doing nothing guarantees failure. Sometimes, maintaining the status quo is the best possible choice. I didn't want to fail, of course. I didn't want to regret my choices. And with that goal in mind, there were a few things I wanted to try. It felt worth risking a more proactive, open approach with Ariel and Luke. In particular, I wanted to approach Luke when the moment seemed right. I hadn't decided exactly what I was going to say to him yet, and it might just make the situation worse. But I still felt the need to tell him exactly how dangerous the man-god really was. It might not be the right call. I wanted to do it anyway. I made my way back to camp with these thoughts running through my mind. All I had left to do tonight was to pop out of the woods and inform the others I hadn't spotted any danger in the area. Sylphy and Clean were sharing my shift tonight. I'd left them by the fire less than 30 minutes ago. But as I approached, I found that there were 3 figures waiting for me now. Had somebody woken up in the middle of the night? If a monster had attacked in my absence, Eris or Ghislaine might have gotten up to help. The third figure sitting by the fire wasn't bulky, but they were a bit taller than Sylphy with her small, slender silhouette, and about the same size as Clean. The size of an average woman, in other words. Eris was noticeably taller than that, so it couldn't be her. Who did that leave? Elamoy. I had no idea why she'd be awake. As I drew closer, one of the 3 silhouettes rose to its feet.
It's a lovely night. Don't you agree, Rudeus?
It was Princess Ariel. She was facing me now. The fire behind her cast her shapely features in shadow. Sylphy and Clean looked on, their expressions troubled.
Would you care to join me for a walk?
As Ariel spoke those words, I could just make out the bold smile on her face. Chapter 4, Ariel's Choice. Ariel and I walked together in the moonlight, making our way between the trees. It was just the 2 of us. Sylphy, her attendants, and Luke were nowhere to be seen. Ariel carried a torch herself and led the way. If she kept pressing ahead like this, we were going to end up back at the spot where I'd spoken to Orsted.
I've been meaning to have a private conversation with you ever since we set off on this journey, Rudeus.
Sylphy and Clean had wanted to come along, but Ariel had stopped them. Explaining that we had important matters to discuss, she'd led me back into the forest. I wasn't sure what this moonlit rendezvous was about, honestly. Presumably, I wasn't escorting her to the toilet. Some people might get off on having others watch them do their business, but I didn't see any reason why she picked me for that role. We'd been walking for about 5 minutes when Ariel finally paused and turned to face me. I guess she felt we'd come far enough from the campfire now.
It seems that you value your secrecy, so I decided to arrange things in this way.
This probably wasn't the time to crack any dumb jokes. From the sound of things, Ariel really did have something important to discuss with me. What did you want to discuss with me, Princess Ariel? I had a general idea what this was about, but it felt safer not to jump to any conclusions. Still smiling boldly, Ariel reached out and took my chin in her fingers.
Try to be patient. The night's still young.
Could we make a no-touching rule, please? I guess it might be, but I'd prefer to sleep for most of it.
Oh, don't be such a stiff. I want this to be a more casual conversation.
Ariel withdrew her hand and sat down on a nearby tree root. Just as a precaution, I decided to activate my Eye of Foresight. It wasn't that I expected Ariel to do anything. I just couldn't risk anything unexpected happening to her.
I must say, Sylphy and Eris certainly get along nicely, don't they?
Had she really brought me out here to talk about this? Probably not. She was just trying to break the ice, surely. I suppose you're right. At first I was afraid they'd fight more frequently, but they seemed to genuinely like each other. Happy in all honesty, I'd half expected Eris' addition to the family to transform our house into a chaotic battleground. I was worried she would clash with Sylphy and Roxy on a regular basis. To my surprise, though, she hadn't gotten into a single real fight with any other members of the family.
You know, when you went off to patrol the area the other night, they were chatting with each other as they lay in bed.
Happy, oh yeah? What about?
Eris was grumbling that everyone should just stop arguing and do exactly what you say. Sylphy tried to convince her that even you make mistakes at times, and they needed to be ready to step in and support you.
Happy it was nice to be trusted, of course, but Eris seriously gave me way too much credit. Sylphy was always trying to help me out in subtle ways behind the scenes, and I really appreciated that. I had to assume they were both uneasy about my decision to join forces with Orsted, but so far, they were following my lead without a word of complaint.
They're like polar opposites, aren't they? Eris throws herself to the front lines to fight your enemies, and Sylphy stays behind to support you in other ways.
Happy I'm very lucky to have them around. They both complement some of my glaring weaknesses. Happy my affection for them had developed out of gratitude. They'd both done so much for me, and I wouldn't forget it as long as I lived.
The amusing part, to me at least, is how Sylphy treats Eris like a little sister.
Surprised,
A rather impulsive one, in need of scolding. Eris seems to accept that role herself. She tends to do what Sylphy tells her, although a bit begrudgingly.
Huh. I noticed myself, to be honest. Now that I thought about it, though, I hadn't spent that much time talking with either of them recently. Maybe I was getting tunnel vision again. Once I saw that Eris was adapting to our family, I'd figured that I didn't need to keep too close an eye on her. But it was only going well because Sylphy had been stepping in to look after her.
It's funny, don't you think? Sylphy's the younger and smaller one, but somehow she's the big sister.
Happy you're very perceptive, Your Highness.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I just have fewer things to keep my eye on than you do, and fewer matters on my mind.
Ariel chose this moment to shoot me a look that could only be described as seductive. Okay, I could do without the flirting, if you don't mind.
Now then, I know you're an attentive man yourself, Rudeus. Your gaze is constantly in motion, and your thoughts are sometimes occupied with things that can't be seen at all.
Ariel's tone had taken a turn for the theatrical, but she was staring me right in the eyes now. Apparently, we were coming to the real topic of this conversation.
And so, there's something I'd like to ask you. What are your thoughts on Luke?
Luke? Wait, Luke, this isn't about Orsted. Well, I'm not sure what to say exactly. What answer was she looking for here?
This is a bad habit of yours, Rudeus.
Surprised. What?
You're trying to figure out what I want to hear, aren't you? Granted, that's a reasonable approach under certain circumstances, but you don't need to take it with me. Not here, not now.
Was that really a habit of mine? I didn't feel like it was. But when I looked back, it was something I'd been doing a lot of lately. When I spoke with Orsted, or the man-god at least. No, it was worse than that, wasn't it? I was doing it with my own family too.
In all honesty, I think that Luke has betrayed us.
Surprised. Wow, that was unexpected. It must have been that argument around the campfire that did it.
I haven't breathed a word of this to Sylphy or the others, though.
Yeah, no surprised. There. I was still kind of shocked she'd even reached this conclusion so quickly. I thought you trusted Luke a little more than that, Your Highness. They wrapped things up so neatly at the end there. I'd assumed Ariel had reaffirmed her faith in Luke. It felt like she'd decided that he wasn't capable of betraying her any more than Sylphy or her two attendants were.
I do trust him. Luke has no reason to betray me, and he could have done so at a much earlier stage if he so desired. It would be easy enough for him to kill me in my sleep.
So why suspect him?
Despite his loyalty, he could still be coerced into betraying me somehow. For example, Luke takes great pride in his family and its history. Perhaps they took his loved ones hostage.
The idea hadn't occurred to me before, but it could explain his actions so far even if he wasn't being directly manipulated by the man-god. Let's say Darius kidnapped his family and convinced him to accept some kind of deal. Then he went ahead and sent the Nados Grey Rat soldiers after us, breaking his word to Luke somehow. That could explain both Luke's odd behavior and his shock at finding those troops among our enemies. Since that conversation, Luke had kept oddly quiet. Maybe he was trying to decide whether to rejoin Ariel's side or continue following Darius's orders. That was probably what it looked like to the princess, at least.
And so, I'm asking for your opinion. You agreed to join my cause quite recently, and rather suddenly. Perhaps you know certain things I don't.
It sounded like she might have her doubts about me as well. That was understandable, considering the way Luke was talking about me. Was she suggesting I might have played some part in manipulating him? I have a question of my own, if you don't mind. Why are we talking about this out here, alone in the woods? I could assassinate you out here if I really was your enemy.
Yes, I'm sure you could manage that easily enough. But if I've misjudged you that completely, I'd only have myself to blame.
This princess had some guts, clearly. Then again, it wasn't like there was any chance I was actually going to betray her. There were all sorts of obvious reasons why I wouldn't really. She was probably just playing mind games with me. I don't believe Luke has betrayed you, exactly. I think he's just being misled.
By whom?
Well, that's a tricky question. Was it wise for me to tell her about the man-god at this point? It would certainly make things simpler if I could explain the whole truth, but wait. What if Ariel was one of his disciples? What if that was the whole reason she was having this conversation with me? Orsted didn't seem to think it was a possibility, but you never know. Calm down, damn it. What are the risks of telling her the truth? What are the benefits? Let's start there.
My apologies. I'm putting you in a difficult position. I'm sure you would have shared this information already if you were at liberty to do so.
Surprised I blinked in surprise at that. Ariel wasn't done yet, however.
And so, I'd like to ask you to introduce me.
It was hard to see her face in the darkness, but the smile on her face looked warm and genuine.
I want to see the man who controls you from the shadows. That is to say, the dragon god Orsted.
Huh. Hold on, what? My line of thought had been derailed completely. I had no idea what to make of this. Why had she brought up Orsted? Were we talking about Luke a moment ago? Surprised, how did you know?
It was obvious from the moment he had you lead us to the library labyrinth. The timing of that was simply too convenient. At the moment, my main concern is determining whose side Orsted is on.
She was talking about the conflict between her and Grable, right? Or was she talking about his loyalties in general? It was getting hard to decipher all these vague hints and insinuations. Princess Ariel was usually so clear and to the point, too. What are you planning to do once you determine that?
If he's on the right side, I plan to welcome his support. No matter how horrifying he might be, I'm prepared to tolerate him.
That's easier said than done, you know?
I'm royalty, a princess. We know how to maintain our composure around those we fear or loathe. It shouldn't be an issue.
Well, if you say so. I feel like Orsted's curse is more powerful than you think, though. Okay, what if he's on the wrong side?
Then I'll pull him to the other.
Surprised. Wow. She really believes she can do that, doesn't she?
He's somewhere close by at present, isn't he? Or perhaps you've been communicating with him by messenger.
I had a tough call on my hands with this one. It was hard to say if I could even make this decision on my own. Ariel seemed to think she could endure Orsted's curse, but I knew just how potent its effects were. Anyone who got a good look instantly classified him as an enemy. She might end up putting me in that category, too. That said, if I flat out refused her proposal, it would basically announce that we had something to hide. This felt more complicated than it needed to be. We had no intention of interfering with Ariel's plans to seize the throne. The man-god was the one who wanted her to fail, and our main goal was to stop his plans. Still, it wasn't going to be easy to explain all that to her.
There's no need to overthink this, Rudeus.
Surprised, the voice had come from somewhere behind me. Startled, I turned to find a golden-eyed, silver-haired demon lurking in the woods. By which I mean Orsted, of course.
If Ariel Animoy Asura wishes to speak with me, I would not refuse her.
Fearful Orsted's sharp, intense gaze focused on Ariel's face. She reacted as if she'd been hit with a jolt of electricity. Her eyes opened wide, her legs trembled violently, and a small puddle began to form at her feet. Fearful, there was sheer terror on her face. It was the expression of someone trapped in a living nightmare. Oh boy, this does not look good. I guess I'm definitely going to be the traitor now.
Ah,
Surprised in the next moment, however, a look of ecstasy suddenly spread over Ariel's face. She was pretty clearly feeling pleasure now. Interesting. I guess this might work out after all. Ariel managed to regain her composure after a little while. As of this moment, she appeared totally unruffled. You'd never know anything had happened in the first place. I'd washed her dirty pants and underwear with my water magic, then dried them out quickly with my original spell, Steam Dry, a combination of wind and fire magic. It worked almost instantly, but it wasn't good for most fabrics, so Aisha had angrily forbidden me from using it at home. This was kind of an emergency, though. I'd lived for many years at this point, but I'd never expected to see the day where I'd be washing the underwear of a princess. In this world, the expensive stuff seemed mostly to be made of silk. Ariel wrapped herself in my robe while I was taking care of all this. It was a good thing it was nice and long. Right now, Ariel had put her clean clothes back on and seemed to have forgotten all about the incident. And I was wearing a robe that a half-naked princess had been using just a few minutes earlier. It smelled kind of nice. Happy whoops, not the time to be getting all excited. There hadn't been any time for fun in the last few days, so my horny meter was getting dangerously full. I'd have to deal with that later. Orsted was waiting nearby with an awkward expression. Now that the princess was ready, she turned to face him once again.
I do apologize for that unfortunate display, Lord Orsted.
It's all right.
Ariel still looked kind of pale, but I couldn't see any terror in her eyes now.
Please, you don't have to glower at me like that.
This is what my face always looks like, I'm afraid.
Ah, I see. So this is another effect of your curse, then.
Correct.
I had to wonder why Orsted had shown up like that in the first place. Well, the boss could make his own decisions. At this point, I should just keep my mouth shut and see how things played out.
I see. I've met a number of both blessed children and their cursed counterparts, but I can tell that your affliction is far more powerful than most.
Indeed, but it seems you know some way to resist its influence.
I am a member of the Asuran royal family. We're taught how to suppress our more negative emotions.
That doesn't mean that you trust me either. Not in any way.
True enough, but that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you like this.
So far, this was like two boxers trying to size each other up with a few light jabs. It was starting to make me feel kind of uneasy. Still, it was probably important for me to listen closely to everything they were saying. That pleasant smell wafting from my robe was a little bit distracting, but I needed to focus.
I'll get straight to the point. Why are you assisting me, Lord Orsted?
Because my sworn enemy is pulling Darius's strings.
Do you mean my brother, Prince Grable?
No.
Who is it, then?
Okay, here we go. Right back to the awkward question. What's the call, boss?
An evil thing who styles himself as the god of men. His name is Man-God.
Oh wow, he actually went for it. Tossed out the whole name and everything. How much was he planning to tell her anyway? It still felt possible that she might turn against us at some point.
The Man-God? Isn't that one of the creator gods from ancient myth?
I can't say if he's one and the same, but he has taken that name at least.
You're telling me that a god has given Darius his support, but why?
He wishes to see you murdered, and Grable take the throne.
Surprised, looking kind of nonplussed, Ariel turned slowly in my direction. For a moment, she just studied me in silence.
I see. It's certainly a bizarre story, but Rudeus's face seems to suggest that you're not lying.
Am I your lie detector now? And here I thought I had a decent poker face. I'd have to check in with Sylphy later and see what she thought about my face. Maybe she'd call it handsome. That was always nice to hear.
I have to wonder why this god would support my brother, however. Is Grable simply more deserving of the throne?
No, the Man-God's motivations are purely selfish.
Could you elaborate, perhaps?
Orsted glanced over at me and frowned uncertainly for a moment, but then looked back to the princess.
Roughly 100 years from now, the kingdom of Asura will face an existential threat.
Surprised, Ariel blinked in surprise.
In that moment of crisis, the kingdom's response will depend on whether you or Grable seize the throne.
Oh, what? Hey, I don't think you even told me about this part yet.
Should Grable triumph, Asura will answer the threat with military force, and if you triumph, they will respond with magic.
Surely neither of us will even be alive 100 years from now.
Your policies as sovereign will guide the kingdom down different paths. Grable will focus on enlarging its military, and you will strengthen its magical forces instead.
Boss? Hey, boss. Why am I just hearing about this now, huh? Come on, man.
If Asura relies upon its armies, it will fall. But if it turns to its mages, the kingdom will endure. The man-god wishes for Asura to be destroyed.
Was it possible Orsted was lying to her, telling her a nice, convenient story to get her on our side? That didn't seem like a great idea. Not with my face around to give the whole thing away.
Why would the man-god want to see Asura fall to ruin?
Because it will produce an individual who plays a key role in his defeat.
He wants to prevent this person's birth?
Precisely.
Ariel brought a hand to her chin, clearly trying to make sense of all this. After a moment, she shot an uncertain look in my direction. Angry, stop it. Stop looking at me. I'm not your lie detector woman this time. I tried my best to keep a perfect poker face. Maybe it would help a little.
Well, in all honesty, I'm a bit perplexed at the moment. This isn't remotely what I expected to hear, and I can't quite decide if I should believe you.
Sad. Damn it. Failed. Again.
You don't have to trust me. I'll tell you what you want to know regardless.
What are you referring to?
Luke Notos Grey Rat has not betrayed you. He's simply being manipulated by the man-god.
Ariel's smile disappeared. It had been her default expression for this entire conversation, but now it had vanished without a trace.
Rudeus also suggested that might be the case, but how exactly is Luke being manipulated, if I may ask?
The man-god is leading him down the wrong path, promising him all the while that it's for your benefit.
Luke is wiser than he might appear. I'm not sure he would be so easily deceived.
Even clever men are prone to trust those who tell them what they want to hear.
I felt like Orsted usually told me things I didn't want to hear, but I did trust him. Maybe that rule wasn't universal.
This is all rather difficult to believe. Do you really find this credible as well, Rudeus?
Ariel had turned to me again. I was back on lie detector duty, apparently. I had to admit this was a smart strategy. If Orsted really was making up a bunch of crazy nonsense, I'd have to improvise something that sounded consistent on the spot. Any slip-ups on my part would give it all away. Fortunately, I had a good answer to her question. The man-god manipulated me for many years. He would appear in my dreams and give me suggestions about what I should do next. I gained all sorts of things from following his advice. But it was all just part of his game. He was always planning to betray me in the end. He fooled me into trusting him, and then he turned against me. In the end, he even forced me to fight Orsted. I think he's doing something very similar to Luke right now. The words came out more easily than I'd expected. I even managed to keep my tone relatively neutral. Ariel heard me out expressionlessly, then turned back to Orsted. She opened her mouth to speak, then shook her head and paused. For a long moment, she stayed silent, apparently lost in thought.
In other words, Luke isn't working for Darius after all.
Correct. He serves the interests of your enemies, but he does so unknowingly. I would imagine that he remains loyal to you.
We'd taken a long detour, but ultimately this seemed to be the thing Ariel cared about the most. It mattered more to her than the truth of Orsted's story even.
It's quite a relief to hear that.
You believe the things I've told you, then?
Under ordinary circumstances, your story would have sounded ridiculous. However, it does seem consistent with my own observations. It explains why Rudeus was glancing in Luke's direction so frequently, for example.
Huh? Was I looking at him that much?
To be frank, your timing was suspiciously perfect. But I've decided to accept the risk of trusting you.
As she spoke those words, Ariel had turned her eyes in my direction. Maybe she'd chosen to trust me, if not Orsted? The idea was flattering, but it also concerned me a little.
Tell me, does this man god have anyone else under his control?
He's likely using Darius as well.
That does seem like a logical choice. Is there anyone else?
The odds are that his third disciple is either the North Emperor Ober or the water god Raida. But it's hard to say for certain.
Are there only 3 of these disciples then?
Correct. No more at any given time.
I see. So you and Rudeus are here to fight off these 3 disciples and interfere with the man god's plans. Is that correct?
It is. You're quite quick-witted, I must say.
Thank you. I do consider myself relatively clever.
There was a hint of real pride in Ariel's voice, but she still hadn't cracked a smile. It felt like her face was stuck on a blank expression.
Now then, Lord Orsted, I have a proposal.
Oh?
Since it seems we share the same objective, I'd like you to consider me your subordinate. If you give me orders, I'll follow them.
I doubt your companions would accept that.
I see no need to tell them. They can't accuse me of selling my soul to the devil if they don't know it even happened.
Oh, he's a little hurt that she called him the devil, huh?
I'm willing to use any means at my disposal to ensure our victory. I want as many powerful allies as I can find.
You're not concerned I might betray you in the end.
I'm not foolish enough to throw away my opportunities to avoid all risk.
That all sounded impressive enough, but I got the sense that Ariel thought she was swearing allegiance to some evil demon king. I'd felt the same way when I kneeled to Orsted. As it turned out, though, the Dragon God Corporation was a legitimate business with excellent benefits and reasonable deadlines. The CEO did look like an evil bastard, but he treated his employees pretty well.
One last thing, Lord Orsted. For the time being, I'd like you to place the problem of Luke in my hands.
Why?
Rudeus can focus his entire attention on our battle against the man-god's disciples, while I devote my attention to handling Luke and the Asuran nobility. Dividing our responsibilities should allow us to use our time more efficiently.
Very well. I'll let you deal with Luke for now. Win him over if it's possible, and kill him if it isn't.
So be it. Thank you, Lord Orsted.
With those words, Ariel kneeled before her new superior. He responded with a simple nod, his face as stern as ever. Surprised I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this. Baffled? Perplexed? Maybe befuddled was the word. All of a sudden, Ariel had sworn allegiance to Orsted. From now on, we'd be sharing our plans and working toward the same goals. I had the second princess of Asura as a co-worker.
I hope you'll keep this a secret from Sylphy and the others, Rudeus.
Of course. I have to ask, though. Are you sure about all this?
Yes, I feel profoundly relieved, to be honest, and I'm not talking about the condition of my bladder.
Happy, judging from the energized expression on her face, she really meant that. I wasn't sure what to say.
I suppose you and I are truly allies now, Rudeus, at long last.
Happy I suppose we are. To be honest, I still felt a little uneasy about the details of this arrangement, but Orsted had made the call, and I had to respect that. There's just one thing, Your Highness.
Yes? What is it?
I think I should make this clear in advance. Luke's your responsibility now, but if I think he's actively trying to harm Sylphy or Eris, I'll step in and take him out.
You won't respect Orsted's decision, in other words.
The entire reason I'm working for Orsted is to protect my family. It seemed best to get this out in the open as a precaution. That said, Ariel seemed very confident that she could handle the situation with Luke. There was no telling how things might play out, but I was willing to leave it in her hands for now. She certainly had a much better chance than me of talking some sense into the guy.
I understand completely, Rudeus. And incidentally, I'm looking forward to working with you.
Happy glad to have you on our side. Happy just like that, Orsted Incorporated had secured its second official employee. It probably goes without saying, but Sylphy was none too pleased when the two of us strolled back into camp looking friendlier than before. Chapter 5, Tristina.
The next day, we made our way into the bandits' territory. No one seemed to be pursuing us. Aber and his soldiers hadn't followed our trail. They were probably waiting for us at the end of the road on the assumption that we had need to pass through the checkpoint eventually. Ordinarily, the man-god could have anticipated our alternate strategy. But I glanced down at the bracelet on my left arm engraved with the crest of the dragon god. Thanks to this thing, the man-god was incapable of foreseeing any changes to the future caused directly by my actions. He shouldn't know that we'd taken a different route, even now. That said, there was still a risk he'd just figure it out. If he remembered my detailed description of that diary from the future, he might be able to put the pieces together. But from what Orsted told me, the man-god had been reliant on his foresight for so long that he wasn't much good at speculating about the future. He didn't seem the type to memorize every little thing people told him either. I doubted he could recall the minor details from that diary at this point. I'd been trudging forward for a while, mulling all this over, when I felt the direction of the wind abruptly shift.
Stop. They're here.
Eris tried to step past me to the front of our line, but I reached out and held her back. With her in the front, we'd end up negotiating with our fists. Eris backed down easily enough, but I noticed she was looking off to the sides, not toward the front.
They have us surrounded. What now? We still have a chance to break through.
Don't you remember the plan? I'm going to negotiate with them.
Right. I'll guard the princess. Then.
Ghislaine dropped to the rear of our group without another word. When I glanced backwards, I saw her quietly discussing something with Sylphy and the others. My eyes met Ariel's for a moment. She nodded meaningfully. So far, the princess was acting as if last night had never happened. She'd claimed that she could handle Luke and the Asuran nobility on her own, but I wasn't sure what she had in mind yet. I had noticed her talking quietly with Luke as we walked, though. Hopefully it would work out for the best. At the end of the day, Orsted had agreed to let her deal with Luke. I was planning to respect that. I stood quietly at the front of our group, waiting for the bandits to call out to us. My rule of thumb was that it never hurt to take the initiative by introducing yourself, but that could wait until they decided to show themselves. Eris was lurking right behind me, gazing restlessly around the area. Every now and then, dark shapes moved through the trees. She seemed to be watching them. I felt like she'd been sticking very close to me today. Well, ever since the ambush yesterday. Aber had popped up right behind me in that fight. Maybe she was worried something similar might happen again. After a minute or two had passed, Eris's gaze stopped roving. It seemed the bandits had completed their encirclement of our group.
There's 5 of them or so, I think. We could handle it.
Did she pick up an enemy radar skill at some point? Just then, the bushes right ahead of us rustled, and a man pushed his way out into the open. Others showed themselves as well, stepping out from behind trees or moving forward on the branches on which they'd perched. 5, 10, Eris, honey? There's like 20 of them at least. That estimate was a little bit on the low side, don't you think? When I glanced in her direction, Eris avoided my gaze. The man who had stepped out in front of us had a stubbly beard, a fur vest, and a machete at his hip. Your classic bandit look, basically. He carried an unlit torch in one hand. He took another step forward and loudly said,
What says the echo in reply?
I was ready for this, of course. Orsted had taught me all their code words in advance. Rabbit entrails and the chirping of a thrush. The meaning of this exchange was simple enough. The man had asked, "What's your business with us?" And I'd replied, "We want to cross the border and speak with a member of your band." There were all sort of other codes: nurturing fox for human trafficking, a feline errand to have someone in Asura located, an awakened bear to arrange for the disappearance of someone passing through the red worm's whiskers, among others. If anyone happened to blunder into the bandits' territory without knowing all this in advance, the fine people currently surrounding us would simply strip them of their valuables and possibly their lives.
The hell? What's the thrush's chick?
The striped acorn. This was the code name for Triss. Mr. Bandit considered my reply, looking even more confused than before, but then shrugged and raised a hand. The bandits lurking around us melted quietly back into the forest.
Follow me!
He said curtly, lighting his torch. I turned back to give the ox sign to the rest of our party. Ariel and the others seemed to exhale in relief. Happy as I was coming back around, my gaze met Eris. For some reason, her eyes were sparkling with excitement.
That was awesome, Rudeus.
I honestly wasn't sure what was awesome about knowing a couple code words, but hey, whatever. Cemeteries.
Right.
Our party pushed on deeper into the forest, following our bandit guide closely. The man eventually took us to a lone cabin in the middle of the woods. There was an enclosed area for our horses outside, and the interior was large enough to include a living room, bedroom, and storage space. The bedroom was equipped with a number of 3-level bunk beds. The sheets and blankets looked damp, and they were probably infested with bugs, but they were technically beds. Overall, it felt like a slightly retrofitted woodcutter's hut. Mr. Bandit accepted his payment from me, then explained how this was going to work.
We'll bring the thrush to you. The crossing's tomorrow at dawn. Deal's off if you wander out of here before that.
Before I could say anything in response, he'd walked back off into the woods. Hopefully he was heading back to their base to get tryst for us. The man hadn't asked for any details about us or our plans, even indirectly. In this line of work, I guess you didn't pry. As long as the clients paid up, at least. After setting my bags down on the floor, I explained our next steps to the rest of the group. We would slip over the border bright and early tomorrow morning, with a woman we'd be meeting soon as our guide, and for tonight we had to stay here. That pretty much covered it, really.
I suppose we'll just have to pray they don't hand us over to Darius's forces in the morning.
I had some similar feelings myself. Things had been going so smoothly up to this point that it seemed like we were overdue for trouble. But that wasn't really a logical line of thought, of course.
Ah, my ambitions are shattered, and I'm reduced to a plaything for bandits. How dreadful. Rudeus, I do hope you'll be kind enough to let Clean and Elamoy go free, at least.
Come disgusted. Oh. You know as well as I do what's really going to happen next, Princess. Come on, now you've got those two staring daggers at me. What did I...
In any case, it seems we'll have a roof over our heads tonight. I imagine our journey across the border won't be easy, so let's make sure to get plenty of rest while we can.
The others took that as their signal to get started with their preparations for the night. Ariel herself was looking visibly fatigued after our trek through the forest. She wasn't used to hiking in rough conditions, obviously. I'd expected her two attendants to be exhausted as well, but they had a surprising amount of energy left. They were busily massaging her legs. It seemed they'd spent the last 7 years trained hard for this moment. Luke was standing at the window and keeping a close watch on the outside, but every now and then he'd shoot a probing look in my direction. Clearly, he still had his suspicions about me. Maybe the man-god had told him something like, "There's someone working for the enemy among your party." That wouldn't even be a lie, technically, although I was the man-god's enemy, not Luke's. Ghislaine stood quietly in a corner of the room that offered her a good view of everything at once. That was her usual position. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly. It kind of looked like a signal, but there probably wasn't much meaning to it. Sylphy had disappeared into the bedroom, which she was trying to clean up. I wasn't too picky about this stuff, but would we really be sleeping on those nasty old sheets? Since we'd brought plenty of blankets and such with us, we could probably just use the mattresses. Eris was sitting close behind me, working on her equipment. When I glanced back, I found her smirking happily while polishing her sword. It was kind of an unsettling sight, what with the weird glow the blade emitted. Well, just have to be thankful she's on our side, right? As for myself, I didn't have much to do at the moment. It would have been nice to use this time to give Orsted another update, but I wasn't dumb enough to break the rules of our agreement with the bandits. I decided to take some time looking over the condition of my own gear. 2 hours or so passed uneventfully. It started raining at some point. Not the kind of torrential downpour you'd see in the Great Forest during its rainy season, but you could hear it pattering away on the roof of the cabin. Ariel was sleeping. She'd passed out the moment she got into the bed Sylphy had prepared for her. Elamoy had accompanied her into the bedroom,
and Luke was standing right outside the door like some kind of gatekeeper. Sylphy, Eris, and Clean were talking about something in hushed voices over in the corner of the room. Every once in a while you'd hear Sylphy or Clean giggling, so it probably wasn't a particularly serious conversation. It was good that they were getting to relax a little, at least. You couldn't expect people to spend every minute of the day on high alert. Ghislaine hadn't moved at all in quite some time. She was sitting on the floor close to the entrance with her eyes closed, but it didn't seem like she was actually asleep. So, not much in way of conversation. I'd finished looking over my equipment some time ago. At the moment, I was trying to figure out what else I could do with the empty hours still ahead. But then, I saw Ghislaine's ears twitch.
Someone's here.
She and Ghislaine both had a hand on the hilt of their swords now. The air in the cabin was suddenly thick with tension. Ghislaine made eye contact with me, and I nodded. She moved forward and opened the door. A hooded woman stepped inside. She was wrapped in a thick cloak of water-resistant monster hide, but it was still easy to tell that she was, well, voluptuous.
Angry? Fucking hell. Couldn't you idiots open up a little faster?
The woman pulled off her cloak, muttering curses to no one in particular. She had light brown hair, which was typical enough in Asura, and wore very revealing clothing, which was much less typical. Wow, are those puppies actually bigger than Eris?
Angry? Okay, so which of you wants to see me? I assumed some moron was gonna try and buy me for the night, but it looks like that ain't it. Spit it out. I'm a busy woman.
She'd spoken so loudly and intensely that her voice seemed to fill the entire cabin. Eris grimaced, and Clean glared at her reproachfully. Before I could say anything, Sylphy spoke up.
I'm sorry, but we've got someone sleeping in the back. Would you mind lowering your voice?
Angry, the woman's mood immediately took a turn for the worse.
Angry! What the hell? You called me out here in the pouring rain, and all you've got to say is lower your voice. Are you people fucking with me? They call me Triss the Hasty for a goddamn reason, you know?
Heh. Apparently this was Triss. I'd been expecting someone a little softer spoken. Unfortunately, it seemed we'd gotten off on the wrong foot. Those diary entries said that she'd treated me with a lot of respect, but that was only because I'd stolen one of the Millis Church's most sacred texts. I had no real connection to Triss in this timeline. But I had discussed that issue with Orsted in advance, and we'd worked out a plan.
Ugga! God damn it, what a joke. Look, I'm in a bad mood right now. I lost at dice, and Donovan rubbed my face in it for hours. This new slave girl spat in my goddamn face, and then I had to run out here in the rain. Tell me what you want right now, or I'm leaving. I'm not in the mood for any more crap today, all right? Better luck next time.
You know, I feel like most of that isn't actually our fault, Miss. I wanted to get to the point, of course, but we clearly needed to get her calmed down first. As I was trying to find the right words, though, Luke stepped smoothly forward. Taking Triss by the hand, he wiped the water from her forehead with his handkerchief.
Our sincere apologies for the abrupt summons, miss. Please forgive us if you can. We know your time is precious, but we ask only that you consider what we have to say.
Disgusted, wow, okay. That felt seriously fake. Triss just stared at Luke for a moment with her mouth hanging open, but then a blush spread across her face, and she lowered her gaze from his.
Happy owl. If you say so, I guess I'll hear you out. At least.
Somehow, it had actually worked. Never underestimate the power of a pretty face. Luke shot a meaningful glance back in my direction. The rest was up to me now.
Happy? Hey, before we talk, would you mind telling me your name?
I'm Luke.
Luke chose to omit his family name entirely. He then stepped back into the group without another word. Triss mumbled his name to herself with a dreamy expression. Wait, no. Is that suspicion on her face? It looked like the name rang a bell for some reason, but in any case, it was time for me to step up and take control of this conversation. Happy it's a pleasure to meet you, Triss.
Disgusted? Who the hell are you?
disgusted, her dubious expression giving way to an outright scowl. It was the kind of face you might make at a particularly shady door-to-door salesman. Sad, apparently I still wasn't very good at the whole smiling thing. I'd have to make some time to practice one of these days. Maybe I could get an expert to train me. Aisha came to mind. Anyway, time enough for all that later. My name's Rudeus. Triss looked me over slowly from head to toe, then raised an eyebrow.
Rudeus? I feel like I've heard that one before. Wait a second.
Clearly, she'd pulled something out of her memory. Both her eyebrows were raised now, and she seemed genuinely startled.
Surprised? Are you Quagmire?
Oh, they've heard of me all the way out here?
What's the most vicious mage in the magic city of Sharia doing all the way out here?
Vicious. What kind of rumors were going around about me, exactly? Fearful as I scrambled for a reply, we were interrupted by a sharp metallic ting. Triss shut her mouth instantly and the skin on my back began to crawl. Ting, ting, the sounds came at a steady rhythm now. I looked in their direction and I found Eris standing in a corner of the room, her eyes cold and focused, flicking her finger against the pommel of her sword. Fearful, it was something like a warning, or maybe just a sign of her displeasure. Like the sound a rattlesnake would make when you blundered into its territory. A physical shiver ran through me.
Fearful.
Fearful. I wasn't the only one who was shaking. I could see Triss' shoulders quivering as well.
Fearful I'm not, trying to pry into your business or anything. Okay.
The words seemed to be directed more at Eris than at me. She acknowledged the apology with a quiet snort, and finally stopped flicking her sword. Fearful. God, that girl is scary sometimes.
It's just, you need information to survive in this line of work. We know the names and faces of most, well, dangerous people.
I'm really not that dangerous, for the record.
Yeah, sure. Don't worry, I get it. You're just some random guy named Rudeus, not that famous mage, right? That lady over there isn't the Berserker Sword King. And that beast folk woman isn't the Black Wolf either. Sound good?
Yes, let's go with that. Maybe giving her my real name had been a mistake. It was surprising that she even knew about Eris, though. Was there any chance she might be an apostle of the man-god? Nah, that seemed very unlikely. She'd probably heard a few rumors about Quagmire Rudeus, and one of them must have mentioned that I was working with the Black Wolf and the Berserker Sword King. I couldn't jump right to blaming man-god for anything I didn't understand. It was going to throw my judgment off.
All right then, random Rudeus. Mind telling me what business you have with Triss the border-hopping thug?
It was finally time to broach the main topic. In the long run, we wanted Triss to expose Darius's misdeeds and help us bring him down. But if I just came out and said that, it was hard to imagine she'd react well. I couldn't just start off by asking her, "You're Tristina Purplehorse, a former member of the Asuran nobility, correct?" This woman knew how vicious the world of Asuran politics could be. We could explain our situation to her, but if she didn't see any chance of victory, she wouldn't get involved. We had to take this one step at a time. First of all, we needed to make friends with Triss. Then, during our journey to the south, I could drop some hints about our plan to defeat Darius. Later on, I might mention how helpful it would be to find some way of damaging his reputation, such as locating one of the highborn girls he regularly enslaved. At that point, there was a good chance she'd volunteer immediately, and if not, I could drop the pretense and pressure her to help us out. So, for the moment...
Excuse me, are you by any chance Tristina Purplehorse?
Surprised, a voice from the back of the room knocked all the words out of my mouth. I turning slowly to face the beautiful blonde-haired woman standing behind the rest of us. It was Ariel, of course. Her hair was a little messier than usual. She'd probably just woken up, but her voice was as clear and charming as always. Triss stared across the room at her, wide-eyed with surprise.
Surprised. Why do you know that name?
Oh, it really is you. Don't you remember me? The two of us met just once at my 5th birthday party.
I'd considered intervening, but Ariel gestured with her hand and gave me a quick wink. From the looks of things, she had a plan.
Surprised Pea Princess Ariel.
Surprised, looking utterly stunned. For a long moment, she seemed to be studying Ariel's features closely, perhaps comparing them to her memories, and then she froze entirely, her mouth hanging slightly open.
Surprised? Why? But what are you doing here, Your Highness?
Her legs trembling, Triss kneeled on the wooden floor. The princess pushed past me and stood before her.
I received word that my father is deathly ill and attempted to return to Asura, but it seems my elder brother isn't in an especially welcoming mood.
Is it really a good idea to just throw that out there? It certainly didn't seem that way to a sneaky, careful guy like me, but on second thought, that kind of openness was probably the best way to earn real trust.
Huh, I get it. So that's why you came to us, to smuggle you across the border.
Triss nodded thoughtfully. I got the feeling that she'd already heard about the recent battle in the forest, if not the specific details.
But what about you, Tristina? What are you doing in a place like this? The last I heard, you'd gone missing without a trace.
Well, it's a long story, but...
From that point on, everything moved along quickly and easily. As it turned out, I didn't need to say a single word. Triss poured out her whole miserable life story to Ariel, like a sinner at confession. Sad Darius had kidnapped her at a young age and kept her as a sex slave for years. Eventually, he'd sold her to this bandit gang. For a time, she'd been the leader's woman, but he had trained her as a bandit on a whim. And when a new boss took over, she gained her freedom as a member of the band. There were all sorts of strange and ugly details in the story, but Triss told it calmly, without any tears or smiles. Sad Princess Ariel, on the other hand, was crying openly for most of it, and her tears looked absolutely genuine. With the last of them still running down her face, she made Triss a promise. I can't truly understand your suffering, but I guarantee I'll give the man who did this to you his rightful punishment. Then she asked Triss to help our cause by testifying to what Darius had done to her. It was a remarkably convincing act. Still, Triss was hesitant to agree. The kingdom of Asura was very powerful, and Darius was a sly and vicious man. She insisted that we stood no chance of victory. Ariel, in turn, told her that this wasn't true. She named her allies, Sylphy, Eris, Ghislaine, me, and Perugius himself, and argued we were capable of overcoming Darius and winning her the throne. Triss agonized over her decision for a whole hour, but after that painful period of silence, she finally nodded. She swore an oath right then and there to escort Princess Ariel safely to the capital and help her bring down Darius. Happy Ariel had gained herself another loyal follower in no time at all. I hadn't contributed in the slightest. While I sat on my hands, the princess's earnest words and skillful arguments had won Triss over, heart and soul. This goal had been brought up during our meeting with Orsted the previous night, but we hadn't come up with a detailed plan to achieve it. Ariel had probably just sprung into action when she saw how slow and clunky my own plan was. The princess was one seriously impressive woman. No wonder she was confident she could win over the entire Asuran nobility on her own. I'd just have to focus on the things that only I could do. Chapter 6, On the Road. Early the next morning, we gathered all our things together and set out from the cabin. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the woods were dark and silent.
Okay then, follow me.
Triss led our party as we made our way deeper into the forest. Without the sun as a guide, it was hard to tell which direction we were going, but the ground slanted upward before of us, so we were probably moving toward the mountains. We moved quietly, without any unnecessary chatter. The forest was dense here, and it seemed to go on forever. But then, we pushed our way through one last dense patch of brush, and found ourselves looking down at a sizable lake, with the forest suddenly behind us. Some people might have called it a pond, since it didn't look very deep, but lake somehow felt more appropriate. It was semicircular, surrounded on all sides by tall cliffs and forests, and its surface was a brilliant shade of blue. From the looks of things, it wasn't part of a river system. Maybe the water came from underground. Surprised, this wasn't even on our map.
Yeah, it's positioned so you can't see it from a distance. And this is all our turf, so you won't see it on any maps.
Huh. We proceeded to follow the curve of the lake to the cliff on the far side. At first glance, it looked like a sheer, almost featureless rock face right at the water's edge, but a single stone tablet stood on the ground nearby. When Triss performed some sort of incantation in front of it, part of the cliff melted away, and a cave appeared before our eyes.
This way. It's easy to slip and fall in here, so watch your step.
She led the way once again, stepping carefully into the lake, which continued into the cliffside cave. Apparently, the water was very shallow here. It only came up to about her knees.
Come on, Rudeus. Let's go.
Happy even at 20, she hadn't lost any of her enthusiasm for adventure. She was clearly itching to explore this mysterious hidden cavern. But I wasn't much better, in my own way. I'd never grown out of my love for used underwear. Just don't move so fast that you make the horse slip in the water, okay?
Yeah, I know.
Happy with the smile that suggested my warning had gone in one ear and out the other, Eris stepped post-haste into the water, pulling our horse Matsukaze along. Matsukaze was reluctant to wade into the lake and resisted her, but she managed to drag him in pretty quick. It was like watching a kappa at work. Eris would probably be good at sumo wrestling. Wonder if she likes cucumbers, though. I don't think she has many favorite foods, but you never know.
We should try to keep up, Rudy.
Right? With Eris at the head of our group, we formed a single file and led our horses carefully into the water. It was surprisingly chilly, given the time of year. I didn't even want to think what it would feel like wading through this in the winter. Wouldn't horses die from exposure? The lake would probably freeze solid, actually. That might actually make the trip easier. Fortunately, the cave led upwards from the entrance, so we were out of the water before too long.
All right then, follow me and try not to fall too far behind. You don't want to get lost in here. Trust me.
With her torch blazing in one hand, she confidently set off deeper into the gloomy cavern. I'd taken a moment earlier to summon a lamplight spirit for some additional illumination. Glancing behind me to make sure the others were following, I made eye contact with Princess Ariel, who was contemplating her drenched pants with a troubled expression. Let's wait until later to get those dried out, Your Highness.
Oh, yes, of course.
Last night, most of our party had convinced themselves that it was pure coincidence. Triss and Ariel knew each other. They were all very impressed with the princess for winning her over on the spur of the moment, with the possible exception of Eris, who'd gotten a bit cranky over all the admiring gazes at Ariel. Happy that aside, it was kind of nice to have the princess on my side now. It seemed like she was serious about supporting me. I'd been studying Ariel's face for a long moment when Sylphy spoke up from beside me.
Rudy?
Happy, what is it, Sylphy, my beloved wife?
Don't stare at Princess Ariel too much, or I'm going to pull your ears.
Happy understood, dear. You want me staring at you constantly, correct? Happy Sylphy replied to this by yanking my ear. For some reason, she seemed opposed to me getting too friendly with Princess Ariel. She hadn't objected to me marrying Roxy or Eris, but I guess Ariel was in a different category. I seem to remember her saying Nanahoshi might be okay too. It was hard to tell exactly what counted as cheating in her mind. Happy in retaliation for her attack, I slipped behind her and licked the back of her ear. It hadn't been obvious at the entrance, but the floor of the cavern we were moving through was neatly tiled. Apparently, this tunnel was man-made.
It gets real twisty and complicated from here on in, so stay real close. Keep alert, too. We don't get many monsters in here, but sometimes they wander in from the deeper tunnels. Oh, and don't go wandering outside if you see a light in the distance. We are in red worm territory now.
At this point, the tunnel had a high ceiling and was relatively wide. But just as Triss said, it was constantly curving, and there were frequent side passages and branches in the path. It felt like we were moving through one part of a giant man-made maze.
This place is really amazing, Rudy. It isn't some kind of labyrinth, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it isn't.
How do you think they made such huge tunnels through the mountains?
Well, the red worms took over this area 400 years ago. Maybe there were dwarves living around here up until then, or something.
Oh, that makes sense. I guess these might be some really old mining tunnels, then.
Up ahead, Eris poked curiously into one strange side passage after another, only to be dragged back by Ghislaine. For better or worse, it felt like spending last night under a roof had helped us all relax a little.
By the way, Rudy. Sorry, it's nothing.
Sylphy fell silent but shot a quick glance over her shoulder. Ariel, Luke, and the attendants were following us at a decent distance. Our formation was feeling kind of loose. We'd probably gotten a bit too spread out. It didn't seem like there were many monsters lurking on this path, but the last thing we needed was for the princess to get lost. We'd been walking through the tunnels for quite a while. It was hard to say how long exactly. When you can't see the sun, it throws off your perception of time. Until you get used to walking in those conditions, a single hour can feel like 3. Moving through dark, unfamiliar terrain tends to be more fatiguing too. I'd learned all this from my adventuring days, trekking through dense, overgrown forests where no sunlight ever reached the ground. Ariel and her attendants were clearly getting tired. I was starting to hear a few comments like, "It feels like we've been walking for days now, and we weren't moving as quickly as before." But before anyone could throw in the towel, Triss finally came to a halt at what looked to be a dead end. A stone tablet similar to the one we'd seen at the entrance was sitting unobtrusively on the ground nearby. When Triss activated this device, the wall of rock in front of us opened up, and we blinked as the sunlight hit our faces. Just like that, we were back outside again. Squinting as my eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness, I looked around the area. We'd stepped out into another forest from the looks of things. It was dense, but not overgrown enough to hide the sky from view. The sun's position told me that the time was a bit past noon. We'd set out very early that morning, so all in all we'd been walking for about 8 hours. Triss took a few strides out into the open, then turned to face us as we blinked and squinted.
Happy welcome to the Kingdom of Asura, everyone.
Happy, she announced, a playful grin spreading across her face. We'd made it safely across the border after all. The exit Triss had guided us to was a bit southeast of the actual border checkpoint. If we headed due south from here, we'd reach the Dane region. Fitoa was off to the southeast. Our ultimate destination, the royal capital, was further to the south of Dane. After an extended breather, we pushed ahead, trying to make our way out of the forest. Triss was anxious to get us moving. There was a good reason for that. From dawn till dusk, this route was used to smuggle people into Asura. At night, it was used to smuggle people out. Whenever two groups heading in opposite directions bumped into each other, the head of that bandit gang tended to get very upset. This seemed to explain why he kept us waiting in that cabin overnight as well. We needed to take several breaks along the way, but we managed to push out of the forest that same day, and then resumed our journey south through the Donati region. Naturally, we stayed off the main highways, sticking to quiet, less traveled backroads. Just to be clear, these weren't rough trails crawling with dangerous thieves or monsters. While it was always simplest to take the direct roads that connected various cities and towns, Asura had plenty of others that were mainly used by the locals of that specific region. These were usually just wide enough for a single wagon, though, and the princess carriage did attract some curious looks. These roads weren't on our maps, but Triss knew them like the back of her hand, so we progressed toward our destination steadily enough. Thanks to her, we stayed one step ahead of Abur. Well, assuming he was even pursuing us at this point, it was entirely possible that the man-god and his allies knew exactly where we were and had simply decided to concentrate their forces in the capital or the palace. There was no telling if it was the man-god or Darius who was calling the shots about these things, but we needed to tread very carefully regardless. On our journey south, we passed by the Fitoa region. Some years had passed since the rebuilding effort began in earnest. Fields of crops were dotted here and there across its landscape. The people living in the area looked like they'd regained some of their spirits, too. Still, it was a far cry from the endless fields of golden wheat that I remembered. It would probably take another decade before Fito regained that level of prosperity. Ariel and Sylphy paused, their horses side by side, to look out at the grassy plain with its smattering of fields. The expressions on their faces contrasted sharply. Sylphy looked nostalgic, and Ariel frowned sulkily.
There's a lot more fields of wheat than the last time we passed through here.
If you say so, I don't remember.
I hope they get it all rebuilt soon.
I couldn't care less.
Come on, don't say that. It's the place where we were born and raised, right? I'm not saying I'd want to go back there for good, but I'm sure you've got some old friends living there, right?
Not really. Everyone back home hated my guts.
I guess I wasn't too popular either. Actually,
Paused, smiling slightly as she recalled the past. It put me in a kind of sentimental mood as well. Both had been loners as kids, but for very different reasons. Sylphy was bullied relentlessly and retreated into her shell like a turtle. Eris jumped at anyone who tried to approach her, scaring them off with her wild outbursts. If they'd met back then, maybe they could have balanced each other out. Nah, doesn't seem too likely. The only outcome I could picture was Eris beating Sylphy up until she cried. The woman had herself mostly under control these days, but back then she was basically a wild animal. If you'd tossed the two of them together as kids, Sylphy's life would probably have turned into a hellish nightmare. I'm talking Gian versus Nobita levels of bullying here. Then again, if you sent Sylphy back as she was now, it might turn into more of a co-bullies type situation. She'd gotten a lot tougher over the years.
Look, Sylphy, I'm just gonna say one thing.
what is it?
I couldn't have done anything useful for Fitoa, even if I stayed there.
Cast by Our Tale Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Uncertain Squirrel, adorable.
Oh, right. You were the daughter of the Lord, weren't you? Sort of a princess yourself. It kind of slipped my mind.
I was just a stupid dress-up doll.
Well, you're pretty imposing these days. I bet you'd make a very convincing ruler if you wanted to.
You think?
Sylphy's compliment seemed to put Eris in a better mood. Whatever else you could say about her, the girl wasn't difficult to placate.
Well, whatever. It's not like I want to rule Fitoa either way. There's no way I could handle a job that complicated.
It does feel like you were born to be a sword master, I guess.
Exactly.
Wow, Sylphy's really laying it on thick today.
Still, you could easily have ended up spending your whole life as an Asuran noble, huh?
Not a chance.
I bet Rudy would have stuck around to help you and ended up ruling from the shadows. He probably would have made you the head of the Boreas family in no time at all.
Miss Sylphiette, I'm sure you're not serious, but you're not serious, right?
Then he would have seduced me and wiggled his way into Princess Ariel's inner circle. The Boreas family would back her for the throne, and we'd end up fighting Darius or Gravel together.
Did Sylphy let me seduce her in this scenario? How would that work exactly? We probably wouldn't even have run into each other. Okay, let's not overthink a game of make-believe.
Sounds like things would turn out exactly the same aim.
But you'd be the ruler of the Thito region, and Rudy would be your loyal aide. I bet you two would be the talk of the whole kingdom.
All I want is to fight with my sword and make babies with Rudeus. I don't want anything else.
Somehow Eris had delivered that line without a hint of shame. It was enough to make me blush, and I wasn't even the one who had said it.
Aren't you satisfied with things the way they are, Sylphy?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes the whole thing almost feels too good to be true, to be honest. You know, back when we first got married, Rudy and I used to go at it like animals every single night. When there wasn't anyone else in the house, he'd carry me off to the bedroom with this ravenous look on his face. And of course, I was quivering with anticipation the whole way. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be talking about this in public.
I'd certainly appreciate it if you stopped. Yeah, Eris's eyes were narrowing with what looked like jealousy, and I was starting to think I might get dragged into the bushes tonight for some vigorous lovemaking. It was an appealing idea, but right now we needed to conserve our energy for the task at hand.
Anyway, I think that's the whole reason it's fun to think about how things might have turned out, because I'm really happy with how they did.
I wonder if I'll feel the same way once I have a child, too.
If you and Rudy have a kid, it'll probably be a real lecher.
What's that supposed to mean?
Sylphy did have a point. Anyone who inherited half of my genes would probably end up at least moderately perverted. Which made me a little anxious about how Lucy might turn out. Sylphy wasn't that much of a pervert, relatively speaking, but she had Ellen eyes for a grandmother. What if those dormant, horny genes had been activated by combination with my own? We might end up with a daughter who went around sucking innocent young men dry left and right. This calls for precautionary measures. The secret morality lessons will commence immediately.
I hope I get one soon.
Oh, it won't take long. You're a full-blooded human, remember? You're a much better match for Rudy than I am.
That seemed like an unnecessarily negative choice of words. At the very least, Sylphy and I matched perfectly in bed. Even now, the beast inside me was waiting vigilantly for its chance to get started on baby number 2.
Either way, that comes later. Right now, the most important thing is keeping him safe.
Yeah, you're right.
The two of them kept chatting. They speculated about what Roxy was doing at the moment, then talked about how good the food was back in Fitoa. Sylphy promised to teach Eris how to cook a few meals once we got back home. That sort of thing. Sylphy ostensibly did most of the talking. Eris wasn't the best at this kind of casual conversation, and sometimes there were awkward pauses. Still, the sound of their voices made for pleasant background noise as we rode along. It felt very relaxing, just sitting on that horse with my arms wrapped around Sylphy, listening to their conversation. There was no telling when the enemy might attack us next, but that afternoon it was a challenge, just to stay awake. After about 10 days on the road, we stopped at a place called Riquet. This was a city near the southern edge of the Donant region, and a hub for trade with the Royal region. Most of the merchants here were heading south to bring their goods to the Royal region, rather than the other way around. Because of this, the streets were thick with representatives and headmen from villages all across Donati, here to send their harvest south and to buy the crops their people needed from the sprawling market. This was clearly a place of major economic importance for Asura as a whole. It was also larger than the whole of the magic city of Sharia, even though it was really just one giant trading post and rest stop. That's the kingdom of Asura for you. We wanted to make it to the capital city of ours without making our presence known if possible. We'd gathered information in the villages along the way, but found no clues about the movements of our pursuers. A city this big would offer them all sorts of places to hide and set up ambushes, of course. On the other hand, it also offered us a chance to stay undetected, at least in theory. Unfortunately, our party kind of stood out in a crowd. Ariel was still maintaining her anonymity, but that didn't matter as long as she was strutting around with a bunch of eye-catching bodyguards like Ghislaine, Eris, and Sylphy. Luke was a well-known figure in Asura in his own right. However, there was no going around this city. Triss knew all the roads in Asura, but she couldn't make new ones appear out of thin air, and people generally only made roads to places they wanted to go to. Bluntly, the only road that led from Donati into the royal region ran through this city. Riquet was a choke point, just like the border fortress. There was an excellent chance our enemies were waiting for us here. To my surprise, though, the guards at the gate didn't stop us, and there weren't ranks of armored soldiers across the streets inside. Triss swiftly guided us to an inn that was well suited for groups looking to keep a low profile. It looked like a normal place from the outside, but it was actually run and staffed by people closely connected to her bandit gang. They also owned the buildings on every side of it and had underground tunnels to allow for emergency escapes. It was like something out of an old ninja movie. Ariel would be shutting herself inside the inn while Triss headed out onto the streets to gather information. The rest of us stayed in the inn to guard the princess. Glenn and I stood watch at the inn's first-floor stairway, with Eris and Sylphy guarding Ariel in her room.
The two attendants had disguised themselves and gone out to buy supplies. Luke was laying low in Ariel's room. That made me a little anxious, but I had to trust that he wouldn't suddenly lose his mind and try to stab the princess. If the man snapped, hopefully he had just thrown himself at her or something. Stifling a yawn, I glanced over at Ghislaine. She was standing quietly next to the stairway, staring toward the entrance with her ears perked straight up. The two of us hadn't done much talking since this journey began. I guess she was more of a professional about her duties as a bodyguard than I'd ever be. Whenever I tried to strike up a conversation with her on uneventful shifts like this one, she'd cut me off, saying that she was listening for danger. A part of me was starting to wonder if she actually hated my guts, but she wasn't doing much talking to Eris either. She was probably just talking her job seriously. Surprise today, however, turned out to be an exception. She actually started a conversation for once.
Rudeus,
Yes, Ghislaine?
thank you for your help earlier.
I just blinked, trying to figure out what she was referring to.
With Wyatar's armor, I mean.
Oh, this about that battle way back in the forest? Don't mention it. It's my whole job to support the rest of you.
You've always been quick to think up clever tricks like that, haven't you? Ever since the old days.
The old days, meaning 10 years ago probably? I felt like I'd changed a lot since then, but maybe I was still the same cheeky little brat to Ghislaine. I guess so. They usually don't accomplish much against the tougher enemies, though.
For the tougher ones, you can have Lady Eris do the heavy lifting.
Surprised to hear that coming from Ghislaine, honestly. She'd always seemed more like to find a way to handle it yourself type.
That's the whole reason she trained so hard for all those years.
Yeah, you're right. In my heart, I wanted Sylphy and Roxy to stay put at home where it was safe, but for some reason, I didn't feel the same way about Eris. It probably had something to do with all the effort she'd put in to fight alongside me. The years she'd spent in the Sword Sanctum had really paid off. Then again, it was also just impossible to imagine her waiting patiently back at the house while I went off on some adventure. Come to think of it, the woman said she wanted to have a baby, but was she actually capable of sitting still during the pregnancy? Kind of a scary thought. The conversation seemed to have ground to a halt. Crap, don't we have anything else to talk about? Maybe the good old days? By the way, Ghislaine, are you still keeping up with your reading and writing?
Yeah, I practice like you taught me when I have some spare time. Wouldn't want to lose a skill I took the time to learn.
What an admirable attitude. Eris, on the other hand, seemed to have forgotten almost everything I'd taught her by now.
Happy you know. The others at the Sword Sanctum didn't believe me when I told them I'd learned how to write.
Couldn't you have just written something for them to prove it?
I did, but most of them can't read either. They said I was scribbling a bunch of nonsense and laughed in my face.
I kind of wished I'd been there to see that happen.
How about you, Rudeus? You still practicing with the sword?
A bit, yeah. When I have some downtime at home, I practice the forms you taught me and do a bunch of swings as part of my daily workout.
Really? You're a full-fledged magician now, so I figured you'd stopped years ago.
Even magicians need to stay in shape, you know. I wasn't trying to improve my skill with the sword at this point, of course. Becoming Paul's equal had been my goal once, but he was gone now. I only really used it when I was teaching Norn. In this world, you couldn't make it too far as a swordsman without the use of battle aura.
Oh, this reminds me. Do you remember that promise you made me, back when you were just a kid?
What promise was this?
Slipped your mind, I see. You said you were going to make another figurine of me.
Oh, right. I did say something like that, didn't I? When was that? My 10th birthday. That really takes me back.
I've heard you're still doing those figurines even now, right? Make me another one sometime, if you don't have anything better to do.
Happy, absolutely.
Happy, thanks. I don't know much about art, but I do like your work a lot.
That was nice to hear, don't get me wrong, but why was everyone in this world constantly saying stuff like this with a battle looming on the horizon? It made me antsy. Hopefully we weren't setting any death flags here. I could understand it, actually. I still had my memories of cheesy movies from my previous life, so I felt like talking about the future right before a battle meant your death was all but guaranteed. But it was probably the other way around. Reminding yourself of the reasons you wanted to survive made it more likely that you would. Suddenly, Ghislaine's ears and nose twitched. I lifted my staff and prepared myself for a fight, but she held out a hand to stop me.
Don't worry, it's fine.
A moment later, Triss walked into the inn with sacks in both her hands. She nudged the door shut with her shoulder, then strode up to us and held out one of the bags.
Happy hey there. Brought some food for ya.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, aren't I nice? Make sure you savor it real gratefully.
There were a number of tough, pear-like fruits inside the sack. I took one out and tossed it to Ghislaine, who immediately began to gnaw away at it, skin and all.
Happy all right then, guys. I'll leave you to it.
Triss waved her hand vaguely and made her way up the stairs toward the second floor. The woman had only spent 10 days with us, but it felt like she'd already found her place in the party. Basically, she fell into the same category as Elamoy and Clean, a true believer in the righteous Princess Ariel. She had a foul mouth on her, but she seemed like a decent person. My only real complaint was that her clothing made it tough to keep my eyes where they belonged. I guess Ghislaine's outfit wasn't any less revealing. But it's easier to appreciate the muscular beauty of a warrior's body on a purely artistic level.
Triss seems to be in high spirits today.
You're right. I wonder if something happened. I pulled out a pear for myself, skinned it with my knife, and took a bite. The thing was kind of crunchy for some reason, and its flavor was more sour than sweet. For whatever reason, a lot of the fruit in this world didn't taste so great on its own. It was edible enough, though.
I expect she heard some useful information. Leaning something valuable always puts those sorts in a good mood. Geese was the same way.
I bet you're right. Princess Ariel had tasked Triss with scouting the city and gathering all sorts of information. Learning the whereabouts of Auber and Darius's soldiers was naturally our top priority, but she wanted to know plenty of other things as well. She told Triss to report anything that seemed even possibly relevant. She then sorted through that flood of information, picked out the most important pieces, and discussed them with me. Since Ariel was choosing what information she would share with me, there was a chance I might miss out on hearing something crucial. But at this point, I decided to just accept that risk. It wasn't like I was capable of controlling events perfectly in any case. Right now, my job was to consider the tidbits Ariel did pass on as carefully as I could. That reminds me, didn't Geese say something about heading for Asura? I guess we might bump into him somewhere.
He'll probably spot us first if he's still around.
Yeah, that did sound like Geese. I could see him picking us out at a distance, then planning out and staging some kind of dramatic reunion.
But knowing him, he probably lost all his money, gambling, and wandered off to some other country years ago.
Isn't Geese a pretty good gambler, though?
Only when he's broke.
From what Roxy had told me, the kingdom of Asura wasn't a great place to live in if you were an adventurer like Geese. There weren't many monsters to slay in general, and the government assigned knights to protect specific villages. On top of that, the royal magicians and their knightly counterparts were periodically dispatched on large-scale hunts that doubled as training missions. As a result, monster hunting jobs were few and far between. The large Asuran businesses tended to have their own dedicated resource-gathering operations, so there weren't many requests for raw materials either. And given how safe and secure the kingdom was, the demand for temporary guards was limited as well. The tasks that got posted were mostly tedious, time-consuming stuff like missing person jobs and delivery runs. At certain times of the year, you probably could find work helping out on someone's farm, but there simply wasn't much real adventuring to be done compared to other countries. That was particularly true in the regions closer to the capital city of ours. There were always a certain number of youngsters who decided to become adventurers anyway, but as they ranked up, they usually drifted off to Fit-Toa or Donati, and eventually further to the north or south. Those with remarkable skills or extensive training could sometimes find steady posts as household tutors or bodyguards, but that was a high bar to clear, and you didn't need to be an adventurer to secure those jobs anyway. There were professional specialists in Asura who could handle most of the work that needed doing, so the people here didn't feel much need to rely on a bunch of smelly, rough-and-tumble freelancers. You can understand why the headquarters of the Adventurers Guild was located in Millis instead. As Ghislaine and I were chatting about all this, I noticed her ears twitching once again, and this time the expression on her face turned slightly stern. Maybe trouble had finally found us. I dropped the bag of fruit, grasped my staff in both hands, and stared warily at the door. But Ghislaine wasn't looking at the entrance to the inn. Her gaze was directed at the second floor. When I listened carefully, I could just make out the sound of people arguing. What's all this about? I'm going to go take a look, Ghislaine.
Right.
I made my way slowly up the stairs. Sylphy and Eris were still outside Ariel's room, but they were both watching the door in concern. Did we have a real problem on our hands here? Hey, Sylphy.
Oh, Rudy. Triss just went in a few minutes ago, but now it sounds like Princess Ariel and Luke are arguing about something.
Ariel and Luke were having a fight? That sounded ominous. Didn't she have that situation under control? Supposedly? Well, maybe this was all part of the plan. Sometimes arguments could be necessary. It's Rudeus. Pardon me, but I'm coming in. I knocked at the door just for the sake of politeness, but then swung it open without waiting for a response. Inside, I found Luke on his feet, looking pale and shaken, Ariel sitting in a chair with an unruffled expression, and Triss looking on awkwardly.
Ah, Sir Rudeus. Just the man I wanted to see.
Has something happened, Your Highness?
Yes, Triss has just brought us some intriguing information.
About what, if I might ask?
It concerns Lord Saros Boreas Greyrat.
Saros? It might be very important then, at least to Ghislaine. Maybe this was something Ariel had specifically asked Triss to investigate.
As it happens, it's often easier to learn about the intrigues of the Asuran royal court in these regional cities than it would be in the capital. Those who know too much tend to put some distance between themselves and ours, where certain anxious nobles might have them killed.
That was news to me. I guess it made sense, though. Maybe.
In any case, we've learned the primary culprit behind Lord Saros' fall.
And who would that be? Luke's face contorted into an alarming grimace. Ariel, on the other hand, looked as emotionless as a mask.
I'm afraid that it was a member of my faction, acting on their own initiative. Someone who also happened to have a personal grudge against Lord Saros, namely, Pylaemon Nodos Greyrat.
So it was Pylaemon himself who'd done it. That did sound plausible, unfortunately. The Nodos clan had been the leading backers of Ariel among the aristocracy, while the Boreas family favored Grable. They were enemies at the time. On top of that, it sounded like Pylaemon hated Saros for personal reasons. He'd probably jumped eagerly on his chance to bring the old man down. This wasn't good news, but it didn't come as a huge surprise either. Despite the circumstances at the time, Saros was still the liege lord of an entire region of Asura, and even with his territory devastated, he had allies among the First Prince's faction. Only another powerful, influential noble could really have orchestrated his downfall. What do you intend to do, Princess Ariel?
I'll allow Ghislaine to take his life, just as I promised her.
Luke bit his lip hard at those words. This certainly explained his angry outburst. I was honestly surprised Ariel was being so blunt about this, knowing how much he cared about his family. It almost seemed like she was publicly choosing Ghislaine over him.
However, that's only going to happen if Pylaemon and the Nodos family truly have betrayed us. We don't have any conclusive proof of that just yet. Assuming that it's true, I intend to have Ghislaine execute him and then appoint Luke as the new head of the Nodos family.
And if he hasn't really betrayed you?
I'll convince Ghislaine to settle for the others.
Oh. She'd called Pylaemon the primary culprit. That implied there were additional conspirators. So in this scenario, she'd spare her ally but murder all the others. It didn't sound much like justice, but that's just the way things went sometimes.
At the moment, I couldn't scrounge up much sympathy for a bunch of murderous aristocrats I'd never even met.
Is that understood, Luke?
There's no proof that any of this is true.
Sad Luke's expression was pained. I could tell that he understood Ariel's perspective but didn't want to accept it on an emotional level. Still, he was staying relatively calm, given that we were discussing the potential execution of his own father.
It's entirely possible that someone's manipulating us.
Did he just shoot a look in my direction?
Luke, please rest assured, as I've explained previously, Rudeus will not be usurping control of the Nodos Grey Rat family.
Your Highness, we shouldn't be discussing this in front of him.
I think it's the other way around, actually. I'd like to make this very clear to him and everyone else involved. No matter how much he contributes to our cause, I have no intention of granting Rudeus a rank in the Asuran nobility.
That was fine by me. I wouldn't have accepted it even if she had offered. But, for whatever reason, Luke was looking at me with undisguised hostility. I wasn't sure how I should react to that. It felt like the next words I spoke, or even a slight change in my facial expression, might determine Luke's course of action. Was he going to turn on us after all?
Now then, Luke, I think we should continue this discussion by ourselves. You don't mind, do you, Rudeus?
Of course not. Ariel had told me she could handle this. At the moment, staying completely out of it felt like my best option. I watched quietly as she and Luke walked out of the room together. That same evening, Ariel reported back to me. In her private conversation with Luke, she'd finally convinced him to open up and be completely honest with her. Long story short, our suspicions were correct. The man-god was giving him advice. Apparently, it had only happened once so far. As we were preparing for our journey, the man-god had warned Luke to be ready for Rudeus' betrayal. His claim was that I'd secretly allied myself with Darius so that I could seize control of the Nodos Grey Rat house. In this scenario, I was motivated by a thirst for power, lust for Ariel, and simple greed. Sylphy had no idea of my intentions. It was all happening behind her back. During the day, I would pretend to be Ariel's ally but carefully lead her into the enemy's traps. And at night, I'd sneak off to meet with Darius's spies and tell them everything I knew. In fact, I'd secretly orchestrated all of these events after many years of scheming. Even my marriage to Sylphy was supposedly just another step in my master plan. This version of Rudeus sounded like one ridiculously thorough, clever guy. It was a shame I couldn't have him take the reins for me. My life would probably go a lot smoother. At first, Luke had found all of this implausible. It was particularly hard for him to believe I had any interest in joining the nobility. I felt like he'd never trusted me that much, but I guess I'd earned that benefit of the doubt at least. However, recent events like the destruction of the teleportation circles and the betrayal of the Nodos family had unfolded exactly as the man-god predicted. That was enough to chip away at Luke's faith in me. And once he started looking at me with suspicion, he found reasons to believe the man-god's story. It seemed he still suspected me, even now. Ariel told me that the best way to prove my innocence to Luke was through my actions. She also promised that she would keep him from doing anything unwise in the meantime. Hearing all this came as something of a relief. The man-god hadn't done anything that clever here, so it wouldn't be that hard to break his grip on Luke. The fact of the matter was I'd never even met Darius. I had no desire to take over my dad's childhood home, and I wasn't interested in sleeping with Ariel. Luke could suspect me to his heart's content, but I just wasn't going to betray them. By the man-god standards, this seemed like half-assed work. It felt pretty clear that he'd never expected to get much out of Luke. Still, I never would have learned any of this from Luke myself. It was a good thing Ariel had stepped in to handle the situation. She was way better suited to the job than me. The next day, we set out south from Rickhead. Luke constantly glared at me now, and did his very best to ensure that I was never alone with Ariel. He probably thought that I might murder the princess and send her head to Grable, now that she'd publicly declared I would never be a noble. I didn't really mind. At this point, I knew what was going on in Luke's head, and Ariel had him on a leash. It was one less thing to worry about. I don't know if Ariel had anticipated any of this, but I was impressed by how quickly she'd lightened the load on my shoulders. One other thing worth mentioning took place that day. The princess personally told both Ghislaine and Iris about the things we'd learned about the death of Saros.
So all in all, it seems quite likely that members of my faction played a key role in the downfall of Lord Sorrows.
I see.
Ghislaine listened to Ariel's explanation with cold anger in her eyes. Eris made a show of looking disinterested, but you could see through that easily enough. She was squeezing the pommel of her sword so tightly that all the blood drained from her fingers.
Are you going to cut me down, Ghislaine?
No. I'll kill the enemies you've offered me.
Ghislaine didn't seem too fixated on murdering Pylamon in particular. I'd expected this to require some persuasion, but I guess she'd thought this through in her own way.
Sounds good. I'm willing to kill anyone who might cause Rudeus trouble.
Happy never change, Eris. Now our remaining goal was to reach the capital and have our showdown with the enemy. Over the course of 20 days, we made our way slowly south along the back roads and finally arrived at Ars, the crown jewel of Asura. Chapter 7, Ars, the royal capital. As, the capital of Asura, is also the single largest city in the world. It takes its name from the legendary hero who led mankind to victory in the great human-demon war. The first time a traveler lays their eyes upon this metropolis, their astonishment is impossible to disguise. The towering castle at its center, known as the Silver Palace, is surrounded by the great mansions of the high nobles. Beyond the fortress-like walls that encircle this area, the city itself soars out in every direction, all the way to the horizon. Here, you will find an enormous arena, the splendid training grounds of the royal knights, and many beautiful Millis churches. Canals run throughout the entire city, crossed by countless lovely bridges. Other notable attractions include the headquarters of the world's largest businesses, the original training halls of the great water god style, the famous playhouses of the theater district, the sensual, seductive women of the pleasure quarter, and the great gate built to commemorate Asura's victory in the Laplace War. This is a city that seems truly endless. No one vantage point can offer you a view of it in its entirety. Its soriads far beyond even the Altir River, which gave it life. It sprawls as far as any eye can see. They say that everything in the world can be found within Ars, the oldest of its cities. And once you have seen it for yourself, you may find it difficult to argue. Excerpt from Wandering the World by the adventurer Bloody Cant. Surprised staring out at the capital from the top of a tall hill, Eris and I gaped almost simultaneously.
Whoa. Whew.
The city of Ars spread out before us, larger by far than any city I'd seen in this world. The castle at its center caught my eye first. It was as large as Perugius, if not larger, and it gleamed like silver in the sunlight. Grand, thick walls, at least 20 meters tall, encircled this central structure. They were so imposing that it was hard to imagine anything, even a stray worm, forcing its way past them. The buildings just outside those walls were also impressive in their own right. On every side, the palace was surrounded by gorgeous, ornate mansions. Maybe this was where the more powerful aristocrats lived. Half of the buildings were big enough to qualify as castles, and the area was encircled by a second ring of walls. Past that point, the city spilled in every direction, with additional walls at regular intervals. It seems they kept adding new ones as the place had grown over the centuries. I counted 5 outer rings, after which the city just continued in a great unbroken jumble all the way to the horizon. It must have gotten too expensive to keep making them, and they had the royal knights regularly cleaning up any nearby monsters. Not that Asura had that many in the first place. Compared to the megacities of my old world, this place was nothing special, but there was something really awe-inspiring about a medieval-esque city big enough to fill your entire field of vision.
Well, we finally returned.
The other members of our party were moved by the sight as well, but in a different way. Their eyes were fixed on the castle at the city's center, and their faces were stern. Even Ariel had gotten down out of her carriage to stare at it, but after a long moment she turned and said,
Let's keep moving, everyone.
Thus we finally made our way into the streets of the royal capital. As impressive as Ars looked from above, it wasn't that distinctive once you were inside it. All the cities of this world were pretty similar, at least around their entrances. You had your street vendors, your stables, and your parties of travelers and adventurers wandering around. There were slightly fewer adventurers here, though, and they tended to be young. The few veterans I did spot mostly looked kind of beat down and bedraggled.
The other thing that struck me was how wide the street was. You could fit 6 full-sized carriages next to each other on this thing. Reminded me of the highways from my old world. This was apparently one of the main roads that ran all the way to the central plaza.
We're heading to my residence in the city for now. We'll use it as our initial base. There are preparations to be made before we can enter the court.
We got moving immediately. Our destination was the district of towering mansions owned by high Asuran nobles. Given the sheer size of the city, just making it there might take us half a day. Luke was at the head of our group, followed by Sylphy, then Ghislaine, then the carriage, and finally Eris and me. We were arranged in single file. The road was large enough that we could have spread out, but there could be complications if you met a noble coming in the other direction. Normally, the lower-ranked aristocrat would be expected to move aside, but Ariel's carriage was unmarked, and having her get out to resolve some pointless argument would be a major waste of time. Past a certain point, the streets began to change around us. The businesses targeting travelers and adventurers gave way to ones aimed at average city residents. I began to notice people on the street pointing at—
Surprised, huh? Isn't that Sir Luke? And Silent Fits? You're right. Look, they're escorting that carriage. You don't think... Surprised, she must have rushed back when she heard about the king's illness.
One look at Luke and Sylphy was all it took for the people of this city to figure out who was in the carriage. But it was no longer necessary for us to hide the truth at this point. For one thing, it was never realistic to think we could travel through this massive city completely undetected. Even if we'd somehow managed to sneak to Ariel's residence undetected by Darius, the preparations she'd mentioned would probably alert him to our presence. And in any case, we'd have to show ourselves eventually to make our appearance at court. And we weren't in that much of a rush either. It wasn't the end of the world if we caused a bit of a commotion. But, that said...
Happy. Sir Luke, look this way. Sir Fitz. Sir Fitz.
Wow, they're seriously popular around here, huh? Happy voices called out to us from all sides, and some people even tossed flowers at us. Of course not everyone on the street was reacting this way, of course, but I'd say it was at least Ariel and her companions were clearly all celebrities, and they had more passionate fans than I'd expected. Luke was even waving to his adoring public. Nearly a decade had passed since they fled this city, but they'd retained their popularity nonetheless. That was genuinely impressive. Despite the excitement, I noticed that nobody rushed out into the street to mob us. There were probably some strict rules about blocking the path of a noble's procession. Maybe you could even get murdered on the spot, like in Edo period Japan. Whenever Sylphy got a chorus of cheers, I saw her scratch behind her ears. That was her I'm embarrassed gesture. I made a mental note to tease her ruthlessly about this later. The cheers only grew louder once we made our way past the central plaza. I had a feeling people were spreading the news about Princess Ariel's return. Things were getting so boisterous that I started to worry that the city guards might come running to get things under control. That kind of chaos would be an ideal opportunity for Auber to show up and stab someone in the back. Happily, nothing that dramatic ended up happening. I did notice a group of armored men in the crowd at one point, but they were cheering right along with everyone else. The man who looked to be their commanding officer was the most enthusiastic of all. Ariel seemed to have the common people of this city already on her side, including the lower-ranking soldiers. They didn't look like they were burning with anti-government sentiment, but they still greeted her like a returning hero. I was starting to feel a little awkward tagging along behind this procession.
This feels great.
Eris seemed to be having the opposite reaction, though. Once we finally reached the nobles' district, the adoring crowds quickly thinned out. Maybe Ariel's popularity was mostly limited to the common people. Or maybe the aristocrats just had too much pride to stand around on the streets hooting and hollering. It was probably a bit of both. Here, I noticed occasional groups of armored people patrolling the streets in formation. They wore full suits of thick silver-plated armor and helmets that covered their faces completely. Something about their movements told me that they took themselves a lot more seriously than the ordinary soldiers I'd spotted earlier. If those guys were like the city guard, these were probably something closer to military units. Wonder who those people are.
They're novice knights. Knights.
Surprised I turned and blinked, a bit surprised that she knew the answer.
Unless you attend a night academy, you've got to start off as a novice until you've learned all their ceremonies or rites or whatever.
Surprised? No kidding?
Yeah, patrolling the city like that is one of their duties too.
I'm kind of impressed you know all this, Eris.
Hehe. Well, I just heard about it from this friend of mine.
Surprised Eris? Had friends? Now that was really a surprise. It didn't sound like she was talking about an imaginary person either. Is this someone you met at the Sword Sanctum?
That's right.
Okay, so she'd bonded with somebody over their shared love of swords. Sword buddies. Yeah, that made a lot more sense. Happy, I'm really happy to hear you made a friend there. I'm sure you get into a few fights, but try not to be too stubborn, okay? And make sure you stay in touch.
Sure, but she's...
Eris trailed off mid-sentence. Her attention darted elsewhere, and her hand was on her sword. I followed her gaze. One of the novice knights was staring right at us. Thanks to the full-face helmet, we couldn't see their expression. Had we just encountered an enemy? I couldn't sense open hostility, but this person's movements seemed unusually crisp. I had a gut feeling that this wasn't just any novice knight we were dealing with. After speaking to someone who seemed to be their commander, the novice broke away from their group and began sprinting toward us. Sylphy, Ghislaine, and Luke all drew their weapons. Sylphy actually got her rod out before Ghislaine had unsheathed her sword. She must have been on high alert.
Surprised, oh my.
The armored novice, clearly startled, came to an immediate halt. After an uncertain pause, they reached up to their bucket-like helmet and pulled it off, revealing a very beautiful woman. She really was a stunner. Her hair was long and silky. Somehow, even the sweat shining on her forehead looked appealing. Also, she was gazing in our direction, at Eris specifically.
Happy Eris. Ghislaine, it's me.
Huh, guess it's someone they met on the road? Eris stared at the woman from her horse, but didn't immediately reply.
Happy, I'm so glad to see you're still alive and well, Eris. My master was so pessimistic about your chances against the dragon god that I rather assumed you were riding off to die. But in any case, what are you doing in Asura? If you just sent a letter in advance,
Who the heck are you?
Said the pretty woman in the armor, drew a sharp breath, and I saw a hint of sadness on her face. But she didn't look particularly surprised. I guess she knew what Eris was like.
I'm just kidding. Good to see you again, Isolde. I didn't recognize you for a second in that weird armor.
What's so weird? This is the official armor of the Asuran Royal Knights. I thought it was rather impressive.
Looks hard to move around in, though.
With the water god style, you don't have to move very much. This suits me perfectly.
Now that it was obvious Eris knew Isolde, Luke sheathed his sword. Sylphy also looked relieved, but still kept her rod handy. Ghislaine let her blade dangle loosely as she scanned the area. They were probably right to stay on alert. The moment everyone relaxes is the best time for your enemies to launch a sneak attack.
Happy are you in the service of whoever owns this carriage now? Well, of course you are. You know there are rumors flying around the city that the second princess has returned. Is that her in there by any chance? But why would you be accompanying? Oh, of course. The princess was studying in the magic city of Sharia, wasn't she? You must have met her there. Is that right? And then she hired you on as a bodyguard, perhaps?
This Isolde woman looked like the quiet type, but she seemed to be a bit of a chatterbox. Eris didn't try to get a word in edgewise. She just stood there with her arms folded, letting the words hit her like a volley of machine gun fire. Even when it was over, she took a few seconds before replying.
Yeah, something like that.
I got the feeling she'd stopped listening halfway through Isolde's monologue. This was probably how their conversations always went.
Happy, after my arrival in this city, I ended up joining the Royal Knights on my master's recommendation. Once I'm formally appointed as a knight, I should be granted the rank of Water Emperor as well.
Oh yeah, nice going, Isolde.
Happy, thank you.
At this point, Luke turned his horse around and came trotting toward us. After dismounting, he approached Eris and Isolde with a gentle smile on his face.
I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation. Eris, I assume this woman is an acquaintance of yours?
Yeah, that's right.
I see. I'm sure you have a great deal to catch up on, but it would be best for you to wrap this conversation up relatively quickly.
Sure.
Luke turned to Isolde and offered her a polite, graceful bow.
My apologies, miss. I'm afraid we're on duty at the moment. Perhaps you'll be able to stop by later at a more opportune time. By way of apology, we'd be pleased to...
Angry, there's no need for that. Thank you.
I see. Very well then, miss. Good day to you.
Somehow maintaining his friendly, apologetic smile, Luke quickly got on his horse and returned to the front of our procession. Isolde watched him go with a scowl on her face. I looked on in mild surprise. It wasn't every day you saw a woman react to Luke that negatively.
Whispering, disgusted. So that's the famous Rudeus, I expect. He's exactly as irritating as I imagined. And what's a magician doing carrying a sword? Anyway, does he think it makes him look impressive? I hope you didn't actually marry that man, Eris.
I'm married to Rudeus now, yeah.
Disgusted? Really, he's handsome enough, I'll grant you that. But what kind of person flirts with another woman right in front of his wife? You've got terrible taste in men, Eris.
Hmm?
Eris just looked confused. It seemed Isolde had mistaken Luke for me. It wasn't great hearing someone bad-mouthing me in my presence, even accidentally. And I did practice with a wooden sword when I was training, although I wasn't really trying to show off or anything.
Anyway, we've gotta go, Isolde.
Of course. I'm sorry for delaying you in the course of your duties. Will you be staying in the city for a while then?
Eris glanced at me uncertainly. I nodded slightly in return. We'd be here until Princess Ariel managed to seize the throne, at the very least. For the first time since her arrival, Isolde noticed me as well. She looked a bit nonplussed.
And who is this gentleman?
Well, this is awkward. Do I admit I'm Rudeus? I had no real reason to use a false name, but she'd probably be embarrassed to realize she'd been insulting me where I could hear her. As I was considering my options, Matsukaze stepped forward on his own initiative and pushed Eris in the back with his head. Whoa, there, calm down. I'll give you some cabbage later, boy.
Oh, my apologies. You're in a hurry, of course.
Isolde seemed to have interpreted this as a sign that we were antsy to get going.
Happy all right then, Eris. I'll have to show you around the city when you do get some time off. You can introduce me to your friend as well, perhaps.
She glanced in my direction again, but I opted to say nothing. Maybe this wouldn't be quite as awkward if she found out I was Rudeus a few days from now.
I don't think I understand, but okay.
What is there to understand? You never change, Eris. Well then, may the blessings of St. Millis be upon you all.
With a clean, smooth bow, Isolde trotted back toward her unit. It seemed she was a faithful member of the Millis Church. That would explain why she didn't think too highly of me. Eris watched her go, then turned abruptly and hopped back onto her horse. Once Luke saw her mounted, he immediately got our procession moving again.
That girl's Isolde. She's a water king. We gotta know each other back at the Sword Sanctum.
Isolde's probably the sword buddy we'd been talking about earlier then. That was quite a coincidence. Happy you two really get along, don't you? That's nice.
Yeah, I guess we do. But she might end up on the other side this time.
Oh, right. Orsted had actually listed the Water King Isolde Cruel as one of the sword masters who might fight for the other side. Eris already knew that the water god Rada was probably among them. Based on that, she must have guessed that Isolde might be working for them too. It was hard to guess how much a novice knight could influence events. But despite her current rank, she was still a fearsomely powerful swordswoman. There was a good chance she might show up on the battlefield at some point. Could you handle that, Eris? If it happened?
She'd be a good challenge. Maybe we'd finally get to settle which of us is stronger.
Right. Eris said it with no hesitation. It seemed strange to me, but those were obviously her genuine feelings. The two of them were rivals. That made sense. But if they were comfortable with the idea of killing each other, it wasn't the kind of rivalry I could ever really understand.
Sad I had to hope it wouldn't come to that, and they could keep competing with each other for many years. Death tends to be a pretty final thing, you know? A little further down the road, our procession took a right turn and began to climb uphill. We soon reached a thick, imposing wall guarded by soldiers, but Luke showed them some sort of emblem he was carrying, and they led us through the gate immediately. After cutting across the district where the mid-ranked nobles lived, we passed through another wall and emerged into an area where the houses were as big as the fortresses of minor nations. This was the High Nobles District. Ariel's residence turned out to be a decent distance away from the Silver Palace. Although it stood on an ordinary city block, the thing had to be 5 times larger than my house back in Ranoa. It wasn't as enormous as the mansion Eris and her family had once lived in, but it was far too large to be a practical house for any one person. It was evening by the time we reached its gates. We'd entered ours a little after noon, so it really had taken half our day just to move through the city's streets. When we entered the mansion's grounds, a man who looked to be a butler emerged from within. After spotting Luke, he ran off in a great hurry and gathered all the maids to receive us. There were only 5 of them, as it turned out. Apparently, this small household staff had been keeping the mansion well maintained during the years of Ariel's absence. After a few formalities, they showed us into the building itself. The interior was luxurious. It couldn't match Perugius's castle for sheer splendor, but every point of importance was occupied with pricey-looking works of art. The decor was just slightly fancier than what I remembered seeing in Eris's childhood home. That seemed about right for the second residence of an Asuran princess. Once we were assigned our individual rooms, we headed to the bath to wash off the dust of the road. Even the buckets we used to rinse ourselves were richly ornamented works of art. The mansion apparently had a larger bathroom with a tub and a larger bath, but it was presumably reserved for Princess Ariel. After we'd all freshened up a little, it was time for dinner. I dined with Ariel, Ariel and Sylphy that night. Ariel's official subordinates apparently ate in a different room.
Now then, Sir Rudeus,
Yes, Your Highness.
first let me express my gratitude. Thanks in no small part to you, we've made it safely to our destination.
We'd only just finished our meal, but it seemed the princess was ready to get down to business.
I'm going to begin making my arrangements tomorrow. I will prepare a suitable stage for the arrival of Lord Perugius and the downfall of High Minister Darius. This will involve sounding out the nobles who've switched sides in my absence, gathering information, contacting the allies I had waiting for me in the city, and taking certain other measures. I'm going to be quite busy.
Right?
I intend to set the stage promptly before Darius can move against us. Fortunately, the news of my father's illness has already brought the kingdom's most powerful nobles to the city.
So it won't be long until the showdown, then. How long are you planning to spend on these preparations?
It should take about 10 days.
Got it. That was honestly faster than I'd expected.
We've already secured the cards we need to play. I'll take other steps as well, but in essence, I believe our victory is already guaranteed, so long as we have our stage. For that reason, it seems possible that the enemy will attempt to destroy that stage by force.
Made sense. Instead of competing in a hopeless chess match, Darius might just try to overturn the board. Our enemies had been holding back their firepower so far. This seemed like a very plausible time for them to use it.
We've assembled a competent force in our own right, but I'd like to increase the odds in our favor. It would be best to chip away at our enemy's threats in advance.
That makes sense.
I would like to ask you, Eris and Sylphy, to take on this particular role.
You want us to go out and hunt down the enemy?
No. I imagine that would be very difficult indeed. The capital is an enormous place, and if you spend too long wandering its streets, they may launch an attack on me first.
Ariel had allies in this city, but none of them were powerful fighters capable of going head-to-head with the likes of a North Emperor. In other words, her actual fighting force was limited to the small group she'd brought with her. And if Sylphy, Eris, and I all wandered off, that would only leave Luke and Ghislaine to protect her. Ghislaine was one hell of a fighter, but she'd probably be overwhelmed if the enemy sent multiple sword masters on the level of a North King.
Instead, I think we can lure them out into the open.
What do you mean?
We'll deliberately present them with a golden opportunity so that they'll pounce. I have a magic item that should make this possible.
Was she talking about that appearance-altering ring, maybe? With that thing, we could disguise someone as Ariel and put them in a situation where they'd be vulnerable. Then we could strike at the enemy when they showed themselves. Staging the opportunity wouldn't be that hard. Ariel could even work it into the schedule she had in mind. We'd give the enemy chances to attack her on the way back from her meetings with the nobles. If they didn't come in the morning, we'd try it again at night and change things up slightly. By having them come to us, we wouldn't have to waste time looking for them, and it would be easier to keep Ariel safe during the operation. The real princess would be close by, after all.
This would involve placing you in some amount of danger, Sylphy. However,
That won't be a problem. This is the moment of truth, right? Let's do everything we possibly can.
It sounded like she'd be acting as the decoy, which worried me a little, but it wasn't like she'd be safe anywhere on the battlefield, really. We'd come too far to back down now. As long as she was willing, I'd just have to make damn sure I protected her. Do you think they'll actually take the bait?
I would say it's about a 50-50 chance.
Honestly, we hadn't been attacked a single time since slipping past Ober into Asuran territory. We'd been cautious and alert, of course, but the journey here had taken nearly a month. Surely there were moments when they could have ambushed us. To me, that suggested they'd anticipated Ariel's plan for a dramatic showdown and chose to gather their forces here to overwhelm us at the crucial moment. In that case, it was very possible they had more than enough firepower to do the job. The man-god had given them a good sense of our party's size and strength after all. It was the kind of forceful, bloody strategy that might lead to ugly complications down the road. But with the throne of Asura on the line, that was probably a risk they were prepared to take.
If they do bite, we'll be in good shape. But if they don't...
I guess we'll have to settle things in one big battle.
Indeed, I think we'd have to rely on you quite heavily in that scenario, Sir Rudeus.
Yeah, I guess so. Not a super reassuring thought. Can we call in any sort of reinforcements?
We do have a number of allies I found in Renoa and sent here in advance, but even the best of them are only advanced-class swordsmen or magicians. I intend to deploy them on the day of our performance, but they wouldn't be much use against a North King, much less an Emperor.
Oh well. Never hurts to ask, I guess.
If it's absolutely necessary, we could perhaps ask our other ally for assistance.
Our other ally? That had to mean Orsted. At this point, I wasn't even sure if he was in the city yet. I'd kept up my regular reports, but there hadn't been much to tell him lately, and he wasn't saying much either. Ariel hadn't seen him face to face since that first encounter. Luke was too wary of me to let me wander off alone with her. I guess you're right. Let's try that if all else fails. Sylphy looked somewhat puzzled by this exchange, but hopefully she'd shrug it off.
Very well then. We'll proceed with the initial plan for now.